So long story short, my husband and I had heard a horrific car accident while we were camping and getting ready for bed in our tent. It was a super windy, dangerous road that led up to the camping areas, so we were immediately concerned about someone being in grave danger, and potentially with children at that. Without a single word to each other, we hopped up and ran to the direction that we heard the wreck take place. We got there at the same time just about as the police did, and ended up giving our info if needed and heading back to our campsite. Now, I was pretty pregnant at the time, so I really had to pee after all the running and the adrenaline. We decided to stop at the only restroom open at the time, which was a bit past our campsite, and incredibly dark without other campers around creating light. After I used the restroom, I'm walking back out to my husband when I noticed behind him a flash of light frantically bouncing up and down from someone booking it towards the restroom. Jokingly, I chuckled about this guy must really need to use the bathroom or something, but it was a very short-lived moment. This man stopped dead in front of us and basically whispered, "Wow, you guys are fast," and then smiled in the most unnerving way. It absolutely sank my stomach immediately, heartbeat pounding in my ears, instant nausea, goosebumps, you name it. Husband didn't seem put off by any means and noted that we were worried about the accident, etc. Dude continues on as if discussing the weather with a friend, saying that he's just used to this kind of stuff, asks if we're leaving tomorrow. I almost angrily ask, "Used to what?" Which he shrugged off and just explained that he traveled a lot and camped. At that point, I had already started taking steps backwards, to the point there where my husband finally starts noticing something's off with at least me. In the moment, I decided to lie and say that we needed to get back to our tent, because the cops were coming to take our statements, which was completely false, but I, for whatever reason, just fabricated that, like verbal vomit, without even thinking. Even though my husband chimed in and agreed, saying that we needed to get back, this man does not stop. He starts matching our steps backwards with steps forwards towards us, and begins telling us that morning he went for a walk and found these beautiful flowers, but had heard a deep growl which scared him. He ended this very concerning story with saying that he realized that you never know what day is going to be your last. It was at that point that I realized the entire time he had been fiddling with his hands in his hoodie pocket because he had a knife. I screamed "Run!" and without hesitation my husband grabbed my hand and we started running for our lives. In those first few moments of taking off, he asked me what was going on, and I screamed "Flowers don't growl" and started sobbing. This man had never taken the flashlight off of us, mind you, had it on one of his hands by his hoodie pocket the whole encounter, so we knew that he was chasing us when the flashing became erratic again, shining up and down over us. I'll never forget watching our shadows go from big to small from the movement of his hand while running hard. I looked back to see him behind us with the same smile that he had in the beginning, and it absolutely terrified me. We had to cut through some woods because he was gaining on us so fast, and in the heat of the moment decided to just continue through the woods back to the police instead of staying on the road that we would come up to after cutting through. We both looked back and last saw him right at the edge of the road where we would have come out if we had decided to take that way, because it would have been the fastest to the wreck. And seeing that, we knew that we had made the right decision immediately, and knew that it was a life or death situation in that moment. It clicked for us that he had expected us to take the road, and looked disappointed that we had taken the longer route instead. We didn't see the flashlight or him after we looked forward again, and when we told the police, they did go, but they failed to find the guy. Fast forward a couple of years after this traumatic experience, and dozens of unsuccessful follow-up calls to see if they ever found him, I decided to post something on TikTok about it. It actually went viral overnight, and by the next day, someone who had lived in the area had actually found this guy, and shared a news article. He killed 2 weeks later at another campsite not too far from where we went. He attacked and stabbed a man who died immediately, and a woman who luckily survived, but only by playing dead. When I tell you finding this out absolutely sent me into a spiral, man do I mean it. I cannot even remotely begin to describe the mixed emotions of getting closure from him having been found, to the heartbreak and survivor's guilt of knowing that he went on to successfully kill because he wasn't caught after our experience. This changed my life. I'll never be able to enjoy camping again, and we used to love it. Look, please, for the love of all that is good, always go camping or hiking protected. It turns out that camping and hiking and murders are scarily common and seem to be a free-for-all to all serial killers. I mean, really, just look up camping cold cases and you'll be blindsided by just how common it all is. This happened when I was 4, so I don't remember all of the minor details, but my mum does, and we kind of trace back this whole thing when I suddenly got reminded of it because of, well, other stories here. I'll try my best to explain and add the bits from my mum's memory, but bear with me. So we used to live in a very rural area at the time, and we owned a small farm. Most people in that area had their own farmlands, but the houses were located about 5 miles away from the area where all the farms were. It was the time when we had only one cell phone that my father used to keep with him all the time, and no landline at our house. There was a public telephone booth 2 blocks down that a lot of people in the neighborhood used though. Now, it was around summer I think, but there was this group of gypsies and they were notorious for stealing the crops and would also rob people occasionally, especially women working alone at the farms. My father had a regular job besides managing the farm, so he'd leave very early and would be back late at night. Normally, my mum would manage the farms by herself, but since the gypsies were going through around and robbing people, she stopped going there for a while, and I was also very young then. Most people in our neighborhood, they worked at their farms starting early mornings till evenings, so our neighborhood was pretty desolated during the daytime, except a few people like 3 or 4 blocks down to our house. Mum was always very careful about locking the main doors and the windows, so there wasn't too much to worry about. My Gramps, from my mum's side, he was visiting us one of these days, and he's like a very tall, big guy. I was playing in the dining table area, my back facing the main entrance, and my mum was in the kitchen, while Gramps was inside the guest room, since he just arrived, changing or freshening up. The thing though is that my mum forgot to lock the main entrance after Gramps came in and had no idea about it. I was facing my mum telling her about whatever little me was doing, and she was facing the entrance, and I clearly remember feeling terrified by the sudden change of expression on my mum's face. Now that I'm more aware of the wide range of emotions than a 4-year-old, I can tell that it was a mixture of dread, shock, and pure anxiety. She left whatever she was doing in an instant, and now she was standing between me and the entrance shouting with a kitchen knife in her hand. And as I peeked out from behind her, there was a woman and she had a sickle in her hand inside of our house. She was standing there, trying to make conversation as if it was just normal. She definitely thought that we were the only people in the house. She was wearing a lot of metal jewelry and stuff. The gypsies wore those. Mum was telling me to run to Gramps, and I was crying, not wanting to leave her because I could probably sense the danger. It's only been like 2 minutes and my Gramps come running down and yelling from the room in the far back, telling the woman to get the heck out of our house. She was still trying to pretend and telling stuff like she just wanted some water and this is a pretty house, but now she was also backing away. More yelling and shouting from Gramps and Mum, and the woman finally left. My mum locked the entrance, and now my Gramps was trying to calm her down as she was shaking a lot. My mum told me later that the most scary part was that she couldn't even notice the woman getting inside, and I could have been seriously hurt or possibly taken hostage if she had noticed even just a little bit later. And the woman didn't even flinch when it was just my mum shouting at her with a kitchen knife in her hand. So she was not scared at all by her and was most probably looking for an opportunity to take her on. My mum was a small build and that gypsy woman was tall, like much taller than my mum. No wonder she was prepared to take her chances. From age 13 until almost 15, I actually had a paper route. I delivered papers to people's doors 6 days a week. All of my customers, aside from occasional grumps and chatterboxes, were absolutely wonderful. Most of them were older, and so many of them were so happy to see me every day, just to have someone to talk to. Many of them would leave me granola bars, water bottles, and even tips at times. Winter holidays were a great time too, because everyone who could left huge tips for me. It was a genuinely pretty good first official job. Eventually, some of the snowbirds moved back and became my customers. One couple, Louise and Gerald, would always stick out in my mind. They started off normal, pretty friendly people, but I noticed one Sunday, the only day that I had to get up early to deliver papers, that Gerald was outside. He chatted me up, which was nothing unusual, and because it was so early and because I'd usually go right to bed after I was done, I was wearing a Britney Spears shirt and a pair of polar bear pajama pants. He complimented and said that I dressed cutely. I was confused though because, well, it was pajamas that I just threw on randomly. I guess I was confused by the compliment, but I just went on about my day and didn't think much of it. Something else to note too is that his wife Louise was always smiling. I couldn't pinpoint why, but it always unnerved me. In retrospect, it gives me the meek and mild and sort of subservient trad wife vibe. Anyway, I had noticed that in their garden there were 3 different dog headstones that all said Fido on it. I was kind of confused as to why they all had the same name, but I figured maybe multiple people had bought them and they wanted to be polite, so they put them out anyways. Now one day, Louise was out and she had a dog with her. She introduced the dog to me, as they had just adopted her, and guess what? They named her Fido. All of the dogs that they had had were named Fido apparently, and they were all Shelties just like that one. I thought that this was a bit weird, and I told my mum about it, and she told me not to be so judgmental, as it was probably one way that they dealt with grief. Here's the thing though, they kept trying to get me to come inside. They'd invite me in for tea, which is not really something people do where I'm from. Coffee and donuts is a little more commonplace, but even that isn't something that people do on a regular basis or anything. Or they'd invite me in to talk to them. I'd always decline politely because I had more papers to deliver anyway and I wanted to go home. Gerald kept complimenting my outfits, even when they were just pajamas. And one morning, he did this while getting closer to me and eventually touched my shoulder, and I was eventually like, I gotta go, and I left. I didn't tell my mum at the time as our relationship was good at that point, and I feared that telling her of any concerns that I had would make her not trust me or make her mad or something. This was also at the tail end of my CSA, which she doesn't really know about to this day, and I thought that maybe I was just being paranoid. But then, right before I moved and I gave up my paper route, a really bizarre incident happened. It was a Sunday, the last Sunday that I had the paper route to be exact. So I was out early delivering papers, like it was still kind of dark out, and Gerald was outside. He complimented my outfit again, getting all creepily close. He invited me inside and I said, I really don't think my mum would appreciate me being gone for longer than she expects me to. She's really strict, you know. Which wasn't the whole truth, but, I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do, right? He seemed to get kind of annoyed by that, though, and just asked, wouldn't your mum just prefer that you respect your elders and not turn down an invitation? And at that, I felt the color drain from my face, and I noped out of that really quick. I think I muttered something about how I really had to hurry along because my dog was sick or something. I heard him say some compliments about how my hair looked pretty. I have very wavy, sort of curly hair that gets very puffy and voluminous when I'm in the humidity, and he would bring that up a lot, saying that my hair reminded him of the 80s. In any case, I booked it as quickly as I could to the next house without running. I didn't see Gerald after that, but I did see Louise, and she never stopped inviting me to come inside and play with Fido or to have some tea. I always declined, and she always seemed disappointed every time. And so, that's my weird paper route story. I know that maybe I'm just being paranoid, but Gerald and Louise, they just gave me some really funky vibes. And looking back, I really hope that those graves did actually contain old pets. I recently went on a date with a guy from my school who I met on a dating app. He seemed super sweet and charming over text, so I agreed to go on a date with him, especially after two friends told me that they knew him from a class where he was genuinely a funny guy. Well, we go to a small, pretty prestigious university, which also made me sure that he would be normal. He was supposed to meet me at 6 to go out on a picnic, but ended up picking me up at about 8:30. He texted me to reschedule to 8 and ended up showing up at that time too. He drove me to his apartment, and although uncomfortable, I agreed to go in because of everything that I already knew about him. The apartment was only lit with one candle and a small glowing light on the floor, which didn't really add much. It was a multiple bedroom apartment that he lived in alone, which made it even more odd, I guess. In any case, we talked and ate some food, and he seemed sort of nervous and uneasy for most of it. He suddenly switched the conversation to our deepest, darkest secrets and asked if I'd ever seriously thought about killing anyone. After I said no, he made up a story about being in the Navy and having to bomb a ship and killing 5 people. When I was unsure how to respond, he sort of just passed it off as a joke and said that he had seriously thought about killing someone else, his ex's current boyfriend allegedly. I was extremely uncomfortable at this point and wanted to leave, and he agreed to drive me home. Before we left though, he said that he wanted to show something to me and pulled out a rifle that he pointed in my direction. When I got startled, he remained eerily calm and said that he got it for hunting but couldn't think of even killing an animal. We left and I got back to my friend's place safely. Now, everyone I've told this has been flabbergasted about how the date went, and I just cannot shake the feeling that something was off about him, and it's creeping me out. To clarify too, I mean like something more sinister about him. So, if you have any thoughts, then it would be much appreciated. A series of events unfolded in my life, causing me to move out and live out of my car ever since about a month ago. It's nothing really new for me, however, as I've lived out of my car for 5 years prior in the past, and have never had any encounters. Until yesterday, that is, because something happened which really shook me up. There's this small beach on the coastline, which has been my go-to sleeping spot for some time. On the southbound part of the road is a whole lineup of cars and RVs, mainly other homeless, but also people coming to hang out because it offers a nice view of the bay. I usually sleep on this side, and the people who come here like to bring their beers, play their music, and gather outside. But it's super chill and everyone keeps to themselves for the most part. Well, lately I've been having trouble sleeping, and I tend to knock out at around 2 a.m.-ish, not waking up till noon. The problem is, though, on the southbound side, is that the sun will bear down at like 8 a.m., turning my car into a sauna in the morning. But about 100 yards down, on the northbound side, there's this tiny hiking trail area in the vast lot just off the road, and there's a few trees there which offer me a bit of shade until the afternoon. There's also a park right across the street from here. It's a much more secluded area, but I've been sleeping there since the last week or so, no issues at all. In fact, typically, only a couple of other cars really park around this area. So, yesterday, I pulled up to my spot at around 12:30 in the morning and found this large 4x4 pickup truck parked there. There's another car parked across the road and a third one on the other end of the lot as well. I think to myself, no biggie, there's a second tree just in front of the pickup which works for me, so I'll pull up there. It's only a 20-foot distance between us, and I am in their direct line of vision. I realize now in hindsight that it was probably a stupid move, but oh well. There's 2 people in the front seat playing their ranchero music, and there's also a dog left outside on a leash, possibly others in the back seat, but I couldn't confirm due to the windows being tinted. I never make eye contact and keep my head down the entire time. I first go to take a leak in the forest, come back to grab my pillows and blanket from the trunk, and hop into the back seat. I'd assume that they would have thrown off any paranoia that they would have had as they see that I'm just coming to sleep in for the night. Within 5 minutes, though, they take off and drive up the road for a short distance before suddenly making a U-turn and returning back into the lot. They do some weird random driving in front of me, then pull back slowly and very close to my side. I roll down my window. The passenger has his window all the way down. He's asking me something in Spanish and his English is basically nil. He's clearly drunk, coked up, bloodshot eyes, pupils dilated, and talking in a slight slur. He's also visibly angry, expressing intimidation via body language. I respond to him in English, so he asks if I'm Policia, and I'm like, "No man, I'm just sleeping here." I show him the pillow and the blanket, but he keeps pressing me. No, police come here." I reply, "No man, police no come here. Never, don't worry about it." I tuck my hand under my head as per the universal sign language of sleeping, again reiterating that I'm here to sleep. But he's getting frustrated and asks where I'm coming from. I'm trying my best to de-escalate the situation and talk calmly and nicely and even apologize if I happen to bother them. I directly asked him, "Do you think that I'm police?" And he responds in the negative, shaking his head. I point up to the tree and explain, "Shade for the morning, my car," just so that he knows why I decided to park in this spot. But he's pretending not to understand me and says, "Policia come here." Again, I tell him, "No man, police don't come here. I sleep here every night, it's okay." But the dude is angry now and starts halfway flashing something in his hand from behind the car door. It was a very subtle gesture, and I could not say for sure if it was a gun, but he was definitely suggesting something. He then says, "After today, no more sleeping here," repeating this 2 times, then goes, okay, while pumping his chest and piercing his gaze in a menacing fashion. The driver floors the gas pedal, taking off in a frenzy. As they're taking off, the passenger dude hangs out the window looking back and mugging the living heck out of me before they get back on the road, hitting the accelerator at high speeds. I sat there for a good 10 minutes just so that I don't run into them a second time, then went to sleep near a Walmart instead. I didn't get their license plate, but since they likely also have my plate and know what I look like, it'd probably turn sour for me if I reported them anyway. I spent the whole day dwelling on what had happened yesterday and have little clue as to what made them trip out like this. My only plausible theory is that they didn't like me parking proximally to them and they took it as a disrespect. In any case, it's a bit of a bummer because, well, there goes my perfect parking spot. So I was camping with a couple of friends at a spot on the McLeod River called Adena. If you haven't been, it's a pretty neat spot but very remote. McLeod town is small and Adena is about 14 miles into the woods, 7 of which are a rocky dirt road into a canyon with a beautiful pristine opal blue river at the bottom. The site was an old summer pack-in camp for a wealthy San Francisco family in the 1800s. There are still foundations of the buildings, an old chimney and the remnants of an orchard even. Now, the campground is right on the river and we went, as most do, to fly fish. It was early spring and the river was really too full and fast to do much useful fishing on this trip, which is likely why we were the only people down there. Anyway, on the first day there after no luck fishing, my buddy and his wife decided to take a snooze in their camper, so I walked up the river a bit to try and find a spot to fish where maybe the river wouldn't widen out and be more workable. I walked through the old ruins and through the orchard before finding a trail to head upriver. I fished unsuccessfully for about 45 minutes, and it started to rain a little bit, so I packed up and headed back. Right as I was coming off the trail though, and back into the orchard area, there was an archway of vegetation that I had to duck a bit under to get through to get back into the old orchard. And right as I ducked in, I heard coming through the dense foliage, a few feet above my head and no more than 10 feet, what sounded like a horse pushing air out through its cheeks. It was a deep guttural sound from a large animal, and it sounded close enough to almost touch it. I could see nothing though because the vegetation was so dense, but I got real cold real fast and moved out of the thick stuff into the more open orchard. And then I froze. I could hear nothing. I couldn't see anything in the brush. I was kicking myself because I was carrying a sidearm, but it was in my pack, which I was an idiot for doing that. Slowly though, I took off my pack, put it on the ground, and I got my gun. I put on my shoulder harness and packed back on as slow and easy as I possibly could, the whole time intensely focused on the sound, but I didn't hear anything. This orchard is about the size of a football field, and the right side of which, where the sound had come from, is dense blackberries. So basically there's this open space, then the dense woods and the berry area where you can't really see much. I started walking back through the orchard towards our campsite. At the opposite end had a similar kind of dense arch-like spot to get out of the orchard and back into the ruin or campground area. I had made considerable ground and was intensely listening for sounds of something following me and had heard nothing. And as I made my way, I was starting to feel like I was in the clear. And right as I let a little bit of a sigh of relief out while going through the exit arch, there was that same sound from a similar height, and just as close as before. At that, I instantly broke into a full sprint the rest of the way back to the campsite, and informed my friends quickly. It was honestly a really wild experience, and as I was running, I felt like my life depended on it. Anyway, that night we all decided to stay down there in any case, and yeah, as we were cooking and eating, a deer showed up. The strange part was that as it got darker, the deer kept getting closer. By the time that we were ready for bed, it was literally under the picnic table in the campsite. We had a pretty uneventful night for the most part, but when we got up in the morning, the deer had slept under the pop-up camper right at the door. The next day, we went back to the orchard with our firearms ready. I was determined to figure out how the animal had moved without me hearing it through the dense berries. I searched and searched, and in the end, I just could not come up with a rational explanation. I mean, there were no paths, no trails. But lastly, and most disconcerting, in the middle of the orchard there was a small pine tree, maybe about 12 feet tall. But the weird part was that something had broken the top off of it, about 7 feet up, and laid it across the vague footpath that I had just used to get through the orchard the day before. And I can assure you that it was not there then. I've racked my head trying to make sense of this encounter for some time now. I mean, a bear obviously comes to mind, but what I get stuck in is the height of where the sound came from. Black bears getting to like 9 feet tall is not really a thing. And an animal that size, having to move pretty quickly to cut me off, does not seem possible over that distance through that thick of the brush without a trail. I'm a touch over 6 feet as well, and this noise was a few feet above my head. The terrain just would not have accounted for that, plus a bear standing up. Impossible. The other thing too is that I just don't understand how it could have cut me off at the other exit and made no sound getting there through the dense berries and the trees like that. I was absolutely terrified, and I don't think I've ever been listening more intensely in my life, but there was just no sound. I mean, I guess it could have been 2 huge bears, one at each spot, but I've never heard a bear make those sounds before. The deer issue was also really strange. That animal seemed really spooked and felt safe by us, and I've never seen that before. Anyway, it's a cool spot, and if I was Bigfoot, that's where I would be, considering the orchard food source and limited humans for the majority of the year. I'm not saying it was that by any means. Really, I have no idea what it was, but I'm sort of convinced now that there was something weird going on there, for sure. So my family and our friend, 1 male, 2 female, our kid and newborn, just went on a walk through a trail near our friend's dad's house. What was supposed to be a nice outing started to get strange though when a group of what felt like 40 but was probably more like 20 walked past us, most of them wearing the color white. We just think of this as a bit strange, but we continue through the path anyways. But then, all of them, instead of leaving, decide to turn around and start catching up and walking behind us. Now, I've walked this trail often enough to know the general area. We get a bit spooked amid their group's excitement and decide to walk into a path that's not really a trail but we can hide behind. We wait for a bit, hearts racing, and I hear a small group on a path above us that would have ended up leading them to cutting us off halfway through the trail. I specifically heard them say something in a sort of questioning manner as well, and about the 4 of them. We continue waiting a bit, until the group on the main path passes, and then we quickly head back the way that we had come and safely got away. This obviously just happened, and I'm still convincing myself that we were just overthinking it, but we had actual fear, and the whole situation felt very strange, especially because, well, they cut us off the trail, and honestly, the way they were dressed, they looked like, I don't know, maybe a cult. I, a 22-year-old female, had a very horrible experience about 2 or 3 years ago. So my boyfriend, 22 and male, and I had been dating for less than a year when this happened. My partner is of a Latino descent and I'm white. My boyfriend's family are believers of the bracelets of the evil eye. They taught me that the evil eye in their culture is used for protection, like if someone gives you a bad look or if they look at you with bad intent or envy. They then taught me that if the bracelet becomes lost or broken, that means that the bracelet has done its job and protected you. Now, my partner and I were hanging out one day at his home and he came across an old evil eye bracelet that used to belong to him. He had lost the bracelet some time before, and he asked me if I wanted it, and he said that it would protect me. From what I understand, someone can gift you their evil eye bracelet, and it should protect you still, even though it had a previous wearer. So I accepted my boyfriend's offer and decided to wear the bracelet, but I didn't really believe in that stuff, I guess. I mean, I grew up Christian and I still believe in God to this day, and am fairly religious, but not any of that sort of superstitious stuff. In any case, I went home later that day, and I was living with my aunt and uncle at the time. My aunt and uncle are very hardcore religious sort of folks, and so their house felt beyond safe most of the time. I never got any bad energy or negative feelings there, nor did I ever experience anything bad or paranormal too. That night though, I went to bed wearing the bracelet with nothing really in mind. I don't know how long I had been asleep for or what time I woke up, but I remember waking up screaming and thrashing. I can't remember any previous nightmare or dream prior to waking, but as I was waking myself up with my screaming and thrashing, I swear that I felt something grabbing my arm, the arm that I was wearing the bracelet on. I remember that I was grabbing my own arm as well as my other hand, almost as if I was trying to reinforce my other arm that was being grabbed and pulled. I think that I had managed to shake off whatever was grabbing me at the time because as I was really waking up, I suddenly felt something at the end of the bed, and with a hard tug, it tried to rip my blanket off of me. I held onto my blanket firmly and eventually, whatever it was, seemed to let go. I laid there in the pitch black darkness with my eyes wide open, just sort of staring at the ceiling until I felt like it was safe enough to grab my remote control that turned my LED light strips on and off. I turned on the lights and I saw nothing at all. I stayed awake for maybe 10 minutes just looking around and being on my phone, but eventually I was too tired and I fell asleep again. I really don't know how I was able to be honest, but I did, with the lights on of course. I had never ever experienced anything like this, and there's no way that I could have been asleep or dreaming still because I distinctly remember waking up screaming and sort of thrashing and absolutely feeling something. Now, I don't know if something had been attached to that bracelet, or if it was just a crazy coincidence or not, but whatever the case, it was terrifying, and I didn't feel comfortable going home the next day to sleep in my own bed again. The bracelet remained in my home, but I had taken it off for a shower, and I didn't put it back on after that. And I never experienced anything again like that, even though the bracelet remained in my home and in my jewelry dish. So, if any of you practice witchcraft or are into the paranormal and culturally practice the evil eye stuff, I would really like to hear your thoughts or speculations as to what you think could have happened. I live alone in a studio, and to make it feel bigger, I separate the end of my mattress that isn't facing the wall with a big tapestry, sort of like a hospital curtain, I guess. I was about to go to sleep and was laying down in my bed on my phone. I wasn't listening to any music or anything, and after like 20 minutes of lights out and laying down, I hear this panting right on the other side of my tapestry. It sounded like when a dog, sniffing really hard with its snout, is all up in a jar or whatever. I turned on my flashlight without getting up first to just see if maybe an animal or something got in. I even said get out twice and the panting continued. But after that, it almost seemed like they got more dragged out and breathy between pants. I also then started hearing shifting and almost like skittering over into my kitchen and bathroom area, also conveniently out of my sight. Eventually, I got up and turned on the lights, and it all just sort of stopped, except for occasional house settling or rustles now and then. And of course, nothing was there. Nothing was out of place. I couldn't see any pests around or anything. But I definitely slept with the lights on that night, to say the least. We live in Australia, and for one of my birthdays years ago, pre-kid life, my husband booked an Airbnb cabin on a property in a rainforest area, about 2 hours from our home. This was a property where the owners lived on a few acres and had 3 cabins in various spots, was bordering a national park. The rainforest is one of the oldest remaining in the world, and is on the World Heritage List. It was a modest little 1-bedroom cabin close to the main house, styled very vintage-like. No Wi-Fi or internet or even TV. We just enjoyed pottering around the rainforest and the beautiful creeks for the first day and night. It was nice and peaceful, but it did have a bit of an odd vibe to it, I'll give it that. Well, the second night was not so peaceful. That night I noticed it was eerily quiet, like dead, absolute quiet. Not a single insect or bird even making a noise. It was not natural for a wildlife area, and I sort of felt watched and on edge a little. But I didn't think too much of it, and we went to bed as usual. But later that night, I have this vivid dream that standing at the end of my bed was this ghastly thin old lady in a nightgown, grinning at me with this evil grin, with white eyes, and she claws up at me to grab me. I wake up horrified and instantly look over at my husband. He is already awake, and he appears, well, terrified for lack of a better word. He asks if I'm okay and what's wrong. I say it's nothing. I keep staring at the end of the bed, and so does he. We put the bathroom light on to sleep that night, and neither of us discussed why. Neither one of us sleeps, and we spend a horrible night basically waiting for dawn, and we leave shortly afterward. Now, on the drive home, I asked him why he was awake and that he looked so scared. And he told me that he couldn't sleep because he just couldn't shake the feeling that something was at the end of the bed and watching us. I asked what he thought it was, and he told me that he kept seeing like a creepy, vague outline of an old woman. I hadn't yet told him about my dream, and then I told him, and we were very weirded out, and now refer to it as our haunted cabin holiday. So, we've lived in the same new mobile home, manufactured trailer house, for 2 years on land that My husband's family has owned for almost 100 years. And well, lately, weird things have been happening. The other day, my husband and I were talking as I was walking out of our bedroom. The light was on and he was walking inside of it. Then he said my name in a slightly sort of concerning tone. I turned around and said, "What?" But the light was suddenly off. Hubby asked, "Did you turn the light off when you walked out?" I shook my head confused. "No, did you?" "No, I was getting undressed by the closet." Which meant that the switch had somehow been flipped. Our 6-year-old was in the other room and our 2-year-old can't reach up that high. So we just sort of look at each other like, what the actual heck? The fact that this happened isn't the most concerning part though. You see, the other night, I was sitting on the couch close to midnight, scrolling through my phone when I heard a noise like a flip of a switch. And sure enough, as I looked toward the hall bathroom light, which is usually on a night light for our 6-year-old, it was off. Then I hear it again, the flip of a switch, and the light cuts on. I stare at the hall absolutely flabbergasted as to what had happened. I never mention it to my husband because, for all 6'2" and 240 pounds that he is, the man is definitely jumpy. Nothing like this has happened like it before in the 2 years of living here, but I'm 10 weeks pregnant with our second child. With my first pregnancy, I always felt like someone was always watching us or would hear footsteps walking down the hall of our old home. I had nightmares of someone snatching my husband away. His mother had recently passed when I was 18 weeks pregnant with our first kid. Maybe I'm being sensitive in this pregnancy, but this is the first time my husband and I witnessed something like this together. So, what do you guys think? Back in 2021, my husband and I went on a couples trip with a group of 8 other friends to the mountains of Gatlinburg, Tennessee for the weekend. We drove the 4 hours, made it to the cabin, and got all settled in. While we were waiting for the last couple to arrive, who were bringing their kids, we ended up deciding not to wait and go out to dinner about 20 minutes up the road from our cabin. We took 2 cars, me, A, my husband M, L and J in mine, and Z, E, D, and C in the other. Z, E, D, and C left ahead of us and we trailed behind. I was driving a 2011 Subaru Outback at the time, and my phone was mounted on one of those cabin fan blowers. We were chatting, having a great time catching up, listening to music on low. Halfway to the restaurant, we get a call from our friend Y. I turn the music down, I hit accept on the call with everyone in the car yelling their hellos, and all of a sudden we hear a woman screaming, crying and pleading, "No, stop, don't do this," with more crying, screaming and begging as we immediately all fell silent. Everyone in the car flies into a panic. Me and my husband, we were scrambling to put the phone on speaker, everyone yelling out her name. Then the screaming cuts off, like the call just ended, and our friend Y comes through the phone, calm and collected with a, "Hey guys, we just made it to the cabin." We are still yelling and asking her if she's okay, and she responds in a confused voice that they're all fine, and that they just made it in but needed the door code. We explained to her that we had just heard crying and screaming, and we thought that she was getting murdered or attacked, to which she let us know that, no, we're doing fine. Her kids aren't freaking out, and they're doing great too. We give her the code and finish up the call in shock, and, I mean, we all heard that. It sounded too real, and Y has never been one to play games like that. The rest of the car ride, we're all freaked out and trying to rationalize the whole thing, to think of what or who that could have possibly been. In the parking lot, explaining the weird occurrence to our friends who made it there before us, an ambulance drives by with its siren and lights on, back the way that we had just come. So could it have been a weird frequency that we picked up on somebody actually getting hurt? Did something hijack the phone call? Well, whatever it was, it thoroughly freaked us all out, and our explanation is, well, maybe it was paranormal. So my buddy and I, who were in college at the time, we were back in our little hometown for the weekend. That Saturday night, we were driving around getting high and just drinking beer. We were driving around on dark country roads and it was pitch black that night, overcast with no moon. We stopped on a dirt road to take a bit of a leak and roll another joint. My buddy who was driving left the car running but turned the lights off. We didn't see any other cars or people around us for like miles. But my buddy starts rolling the joint and the overhead light inside the car is on. Then he happens to glance up toward the front of the car, acts startled, and flips on the headlights. We look out the car windows and see a whole group of guys around the car. We both yelled some choice words, he slammed the car into gear, and we hauled butt out of there. Those guys, they were probably people that we knew from town. I even thought that I recognized one of them, but I've always wondered what in the heck they were doing out in the middle of nowhere like that, on a pitch black night, without flashlights and apparently on foot, and then surrounding our car like that. I've never been one to really believe in the paranormal. Not that I often wondered about supernatural phenomenon outside of seeking a good scare now and then, like on YouTube or whatever. But I always assumed that what I was watching were either good hoaxes or had some logical explanation that wasn't immediately apparent to me. That was, until this past weekend, when myself and my girlfriend had an unexplainable appearance. Funny how that works, right? Complete disbeliever until an encounter of your own. Well, we were staying in an Airbnb in Belfast, Northern Ireland, with it being a small townhouse in a council estate. The upstairs, where our bedroom was separated from a second bedroom by a tiny landing. Upon waking up on Friday, the 13th, we started getting ready for the day. I was sat at the end of the bed pulling my socks on when I looked up and I saw a human shadow on the curtain of the bedroom across the landing from us. Not realizing what it was yet, I made a remark about how that wasn't creepy at all, and my girlfriend peered around the corner to see what I was talking about. Oh, was the only thing she could muster up in response to me. Seeing that she was unsettled, I marched into the second bedroom and pulled back the curtain to see what was casting the shadow, thinking that it was going to be something silly like a tribute to Queen Lizzie stuck on the window, but there was nothing there. It was also the second story, so I wasn't expecting to see an actual person peering in or anything, but I wasn't expecting to see nothing at all. Also, there was nothing outside that could have cast that shadow. I pulled the curtain back into position, thinking, that's weird, and the shadow was still there. Still in a state of somewhat disbelief, I walked back to the doorframe to see if it was my shadow, but my shadow didn't even come close to reaching the curtain. With the pair of us completely creeped out, we went back to our room to get ready to get out of the house for the day as quickly as we could. My girlfriend peered back around the corner when we were almost finished to discover that the shadow was still there but had now shifted to the left. After that, we threw the rest of our clothes on, and when we looked again, it was completely gone. We have no idea how long it was there watching us, but from the moment that we became aware of it, it was gone within about 5 minutes. The second and last night that we slept there, we slept with the door closed, which we hadn't the first night, and it wasn't there the following morning. My girlfriend thinks that it's because we slept with the door closed the second night that it didn't show up as it couldn't watch us. Personally, I struggled with finding an explanation for it, but there's just really nothing logical about it. There was nothing there that could have casted it, and it was still there when I pulled the curtain back into position, which was really strange. I mentioned this whole thing to our Airbnb host, but they didn't seem to register any recognition of it. We're both absolutely certain about what we saw though, and from looking up shadow people, it seems like it is a phenomena that people experience. But can anyone give us any sort of reason as to why this shadow person visited us of all people? Thanks for listening. About 20 years ago, I had one of the most perplexing things happen to me while I was out having a cigarette. It was about 2 a.m. and I had woken up in the middle of the night. After tossing and turning, I just could not get back to sleep that night, so I decided to go out and have a smoke. For reference, I live in an apartment with a small cement patio out front. It's on a very busy street, with a sidewalk that runs alongside of it. While the street was loud and busy during the day, it was actually very peaceful to sit out there at night. All my neighbors were sleeping and the night was cool and calming. Anyway, while I was sitting on my patio steps, a large dark-colored animal came into view from a distance. It was walking on the sidewalk, and for some reason my freeze response kicked in. I became a brick and the hair on my arms was raised. While it walked slowly toward me, I tried to make out what kind of animal it was. It was easily as big as a horse. I do know that sometimes people walk their horses around town, even though this is a large city, but there was no rider on this creature. Is it an escaped horse? The closer it got, though, the more confused I was. Honestly, it resembled a large black panther or maybe a lion-bear hybrid or something. It had black fur that was kind of wavy or curly. I could see the steam from its breathing, and the crazy thing is that it did not seem to be aware of my presence at all. Maybe that's why I stayed frozen, letting my cigarette burn out completely. It was almost like I knew if I moved that it would kill me. My body did eventually let me move, but I must have been out there for a good 30 minutes, scared out of my mind to move. Honestly, I don't know that much about these things, but I feel like I saw something that I wasn't supposed to see that night. I feel like it was from a different dimension or something, and I just got a bit of a peek. I've had a few paranormal type encounters, and another perplexing glitch that happened recently. It always feels the same too, like I'm just getting a bit of a glimpse behind the veil or something. But please, tell me someone out there, somebody else has seen this creature. It also haunted me more than any other unexplained experience that I've had. I've tried talking about it with other people, and they usually just say something patronizing like, "Wow, that's crazy," and really, that's about it. I recently moved to Wisconsin, and I wanted to explore the backcountry 2 falls ago, so I took a trip from the south to Superior, mostly off-road and on fire roads and whatnot. On my second night, I was in the North Woods and it was getting pretty late, so I was on a back road in heavy forest and decided to find a spot to sleep in my truck. I went down a dirt road, probably 2 miles or so down the dirt road. At this point, it was very dark, roughly 8 p.m. and absolutely no one for miles. I found a trail in the forest and drove about 100 feet into the woods, and I parked, completely concealed from the dirt road that I was just on. I got out to assess the area, but couldn't see anything as it was completely dark. I got back in the truck, and I set up for the night. About an hour into watching a movie on my phone, I heard a sound that sounded like a woman screaming, and my dog heard it too. I grabbed my pistol, turned on all my lights, and opened the door to see what it was. Mind you, absolutely no one knew that I was out there, and I was far from civilization. I didn't see or hear anyone, so I ducked back into my truck. I'll admit too that I was a little bit freaked out, but I figured that it must have been wildlife. I don't know, I rationalized it. In any case, maybe about an hour later I was falling asleep and I felt my truck move as if someone had pushed on it. Again, my dog woke up too, so I knew that it wasn't my imagination. I didn't turn on any lights or make a sound, but my dog seemed very uneasy all of a sudden. I told myself that if I heard anything else, I would get out of Dodge. Well, I ended up falling asleep, and maybe around midnight I woke up to my dog growling, and it happened again. I put on my boots and hopped in the driver's seat, and I just got out of there. Now, as I was driving out, I went around a corner on the dirt road, and I'm not sure if it was my imagination or what, but I swear that I saw a tall, skinny thing running off the road as I came around the corner. It took about 30 minutes to get down the road because I continued down the original dirt road and did not get back the way that I'd come from. By this point, it was raining pretty hard and I just didn't feel comfortable being anywhere dark anymore. I drove about an hour and I finally found a gas station and ended up staying the night there. But I have never been so scared in my life before, and honestly, it takes a fair bit to get me feeling that way. I don't know what it was, but I know it was not human, whatever was out there. That much is very clear. So my wife and I had a couple of creepy incidences, and this one happened near Hope, BC, way up in the mountain. My wife was probably more freaked out than me, but maybe I'm just downplaying this. The second story, though, is something that absolutely terrified me. So, we were camping in the literal middle of nowhere between two mountaintops. It was forest fire season, so we could only have a small propane fire that night. We finally decided to go to bed, and we climb into our tent. We're laying there and talking, and by this point it was almost completely dark, when all of a sudden we see through our tent wall. It's not see-through, by the way, a glowing purple ball that starts where I assume was the tree line, and then up into the sky, and we could hear a light buzzing sound, and then it went silent. I grabbed my rifle and went outside, but I didn't see anything. In fact, it was almost as if nothing had happened. I chalked it up to a power line that had broken, but we've both explored that area earlier in the day for fun, and I can assure you that there were no power lines for, well, I don't know, there's just none really there. There's also nothing on Google Maps either, but that one is not that creepy sounding, I'll admit. But in the moment it was a what the heck is that sort of thing. My wife hasn't camped in a tent ever since then, and that was like 7 or 8 years ago. This next instance happened about 5 years ago. My wife and I flew down to LA and rented a camper van and drove it east to go to Zion, Bryce, and Dead Horse, I think it's called. But we were on our way to Moab from Bryce Canyon, and I was on the highway. I can't remember exactly where, but somewhere in Utah. I've planned our trip based on where we would camp each night. Everything was pretty much via Google Earth, so I couldn't tell what was what, but one of the places that I planned to stay at, we had to go down this dirt road for miles and miles towards something that looked like a cool camping spot from Google Earth. We get to the spot, and the thing that I saw on Google was a cool giant, and I mean a massive rock boulder, a very small mountain in fact, more like a giant hill I guess, kind of growing into it. We set up camp there. The ground was untouched and it seemed like no one had ever been there before because the dry soil was very soft, and you would leave deep footsteps in the dirt and there were no tracks anywhere, not even animal. So I go to the mountain and I collect some firewood for the night. I also collect some large flat rocks to make as a sort of wind guard, as it started getting very windy all of a sudden. We notice some ravens on top of the rock cawing at us and kind of flying in a weird circle around the area. We joke about how maybe this is a warning, and how it reminds me of the Halloween episode of The Simpsons where Bart is a raven. Anyway, we eat and we go to bed. At some point though, I wake up in the middle of the night sort of randomly, and my body is covered in goosebumps, and my hair on my entire body feels like it's standing up. I start getting anxiety too. I feel like someone or something is just outside of the van. The wind is blowing hard and our van is rocking a bit from it, so that's making things worse. I'm laying there not moving in fear that something is peeking in when my wife says to me, "I'm really freaked out right now and I don't want to be here." I didn't know she was awake as well and justified the way my body is responding, but she later told me that she had chills and her hair was all standing up. I say, you know what, to heck with this, we're out of here. After mustering up the courage to move, I climb to the front of the vehicle to get it started and drive out of there, slowly as to not drive too fast and crash. We get maybe a few hundred meters away and the wind died down, and both of our anxiety and fear went away, which creeped us out even more, I guess. We eventually went back to bed, except I slept with my axe, like that would help, but we slept well and woke up at daylight feeling fine. And we both said heck no to making breakfast here, as we didn't want to get out of the van at all. The kitchen was only accessible through the back doors. I drove a couple of kilometers away until we felt safe enough to get out and take our morning pee. We were all shaken up from the night before, and we didn't know what the heck that was. We didn't see any footsteps in the dirt around where the van was parked when we were driving out there in the morning, aside from our footsteps which led to our makeshift fire pit. We were so freaked out by whatever happened that night before that when we got to Moab hours later, we actually rented a hotel and didn't want to sleep at all in the van overnight. Anyway, years later, we were watching a documentary about missing people in parts of the US close to national forests and found out that the area that we were in was actually a huge hotspot, and that we were very close to Skinwalker Ranch. That's kind of crazy to me after knowing all the history about that place and hearing all the stories, but it's something that I'll never forget. In fact, I still get chills, even just sharing this. I never thought living alone in a dorm hall could be so unsettling. When I first moved in, I was the only resident on my floor, which was strange but not something that I dwelled on. The hall was eerily quiet most of the time, except for the man in room 217. He was a tall black guy, always dressed in pajamas, and from the first night, my friends and I noticed something wasn't quite right. We often heard him screaming, his voice piercing through the walls in the dead of the night. It wasn't angry shouting like I had thought at first. No, he was screaming for help. Every night, the same loud shrieking cry for help. At first we thought that he was just a troubled student, someone who needed help but didn't know how to ask for it in the right way. We even joked that he had serious issues, but deep down it disturbed all of us. His pleas were so loud, so desperate that they left a lingering unease. One night, after hearing that same shriek echoing through the empty hall, I went over to his door to see if I could talk to him. I knocked, but just like the other times I tried, the screaming stopped the second that I got close. The door remained closed, and the silence was deafening. The next day, I went to the dorm office, ready to tell them that the guy in room 217 needed serious help. But when I asked, the dorm manager looked confused. "There's no one living in that room," she said. "You're the only student in that hall." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I knew what I had heard, what my friends had heard. We had all seen him. How could there be no one there? After digging deeper, we uncovered the truth. Room 217 had been the home of a student years ago, one who had taken his own life. He had been struggling, crying out for help in the days before his death, but no one had been there to listen. Now, it seemed as if his spirit was trapped in the hall, forever screaming that same desperate plea for help that had gone unanswered in life. We also learned that the school itself had a dark history. Before it had become a college, the building had been a hospital during the First World War. The laundry room, where we had always noticed a foul stench and dry blood stains, had once been the morgue. The history of the place felt heavy, like it had absorbed the tragedies of all those who had passed through it. The screaming eventually stopped, but I'll never forget the nights that I lay in bed, listening to the ghost in room 217 crying out for help like that. It wasn't just a haunting in the end too. It was a reminder of how much can be left unresolved, how easily cries for help can be missed. And in that old haunted building, his was a voice that just wouldn't let anyone forget. So we live in the Philippines, and my family has a lot of connections and experiences to not just ghosts but creatures from local folktales. Almost every generation, there would be someone born with the ability to see ghosts, like my sister, who had a stronger third eye from what I've heard, but even without it, entities always follow and appear before us, especially in my grandparents' house, which hilariously even once caused a breakup to happen with one of my aunts. One such instance of these sightings was when one of my cousins, Elle, was hanging out in our grandparents' house, and for a while, she said that it was at least 10 to 20 minutes, was talking with one of our aunts. That day, they were the only ones in the house as the others were out, and she said that the entire time she was talking to our aunt, her name's Aunt Jay, not once did she speak out or react while she kept on talking and asking questions. After this, though, she went to the kitchen to grab a cup of water, but was shocked to see Aunt Jay in the kitchen. When Aunt Jay saw Elle, she asked for help in the kitchen, but Elle quickly asked her, "If you're here, then who was I talking to in the living room?" They both stared at each other just before they both heard someone call out, "Elle, can you come here for a bit?" in the voice of our Aunt Jay. Now, the saying goes in our country that you should never meet your doppelganger or you'll die. Knowing this, they both ran out through the back and waited by the front of the house. While waiting that thing out, Elle saw Aunt Jay in the windows of one of the bedrooms fixing the curtains and immediately told Aunt Jay, who was beside her, to not look, because she can see her in the window, moving like a normal human. Not doing anything unusual or creepy, just there doing chores looking exactly like her. It's a story they rarely ever want to talk about because, well, it was a really freaky event for them. This is the exact same aunt, though, who, in her childhood, while sleeping with her sisters, saw a man with skin as black as coal with blood-red eyes looking at her through a window. She screamed and woke up her sisters, and they also saw what had scared her. My grandparents thought that it was some creep, but when they ran outside, machetes in hand, it dawned on them that the window was at least 2 meters off the ground, and no one in our town, or possibly even the whole city, could look or be that tall. Our great-grandparents had connections with authorities to the point that my grandmother never had boyfriends since the police always were watching her, so they would have known. The window was by a tree where the stories are told that is the house of different kinds of entities, especially of an unbelievably tall man, skin as black as coal, smokes a giant cigar, and would take, in some stories, kids, women, and in some rare cases, even young boys. When I was 17, many years ago now, I was on my way to town A-Line. It was pouring rain, cool outside, and I saw a girl who looked around my age hitchhiking and stopped to pick her up. I lived outside of a very small town at the time, and possible danger never really crossed my mind. She was kind of quiet during the 45-minute drive, so we listened to some music. When we got to town, she had me pull over at the gas station, and she pulled out this huge knife from her backpack, laid it on her thigh and said, "And I will never forget this. I was going to kill you and take your car, but you're a sweet kid. Don't ever pick up hitchhikers." Then she just got out of the car and walked away. I have never been so shocked and terrified in my entire life, and I've not picked up another hitchhiker since. This is a story that I've been wanting to tell for a long time. It's raining heavily now, so I decided to take advantage of that and tell it. I have to admit that I feel a little bit nervous about sharing this, but here it goes. So, the year is 2020. At the time, I was still going to school and also working. My sister was about 24 years old. My best friend used to come to my place for the weekend, and I always used it as an escape from work and school. I love spending time with him. My sister, although a little more serious and a few years older than us, liked to spend time with us too, and she also cooked while we played games, and it became a bit of a tradition. Now one day, a festival was held in our town, so I arranged with that friend to meet in the town. I hung out with my sister all the time, so I took her with me and we met together with that friend. We visited the parks in the city and looked for a place to just relax a bit, but it all became a bit boring soon. Near the church, I saw a house that looked kind of poor, but there was a lot of shoes there, as if the house was full. My friend told me that apparently a psychic lives there and works there and charges for his services and even heals people. And of course, being the age that we were, it occurred to us to check this out. I wasn't a believer at the time by any means, so even the thought of something like this was just kind of funny to me, I guess. We entered that house though, and as soon as I stepped in, I smelled something wet, if I could call it that. Some people exited the room and others were waiting. The house felt very cold. To the right of the entrance is the room where the man works, and that's where we met him. In the middle of the room sat a man wearing a white suit. We greeted him, and without a word, he just pointed with his hand where to sit. After that, we had a light conversation, nothing too significant. After a few minutes, he started doing what we came for. My sister was the first in line, and it seemed to me that at one point she sort of fell into a trance, and I, the guy who only believes in science, explained it as sort of hypnosis, I guess. She started to cry and laugh, and she's doing it all as he says for her to do things. When she came out of the trance, he said that he cast a curse on her, and that the only way to get rid of it is to be with him in marriage. I immediately said that that was enough for me, it's time to go, and that he was a drug addict and a lunatic. Now, for 3 months or a little more, I planned a trip to another country together with my sister and parents. Live music in the car and we're driving, and as soon as we entered another country, the phone rang at the same moment, and to my shock, it was this guy. He began asking me why we were going to another country, if we were running away from him. We had an argument over the cell phone, and to this day, I still don't know how he knew that we were in another country, or how he even had our number. After that, pictures of my sister with strange padlocks on began arriving at the address. There were dozens of pictures, and on each of them was a real padlock that pierced the picture and was attached to it. Eventually, we were forced to call the police, but really in the end, they just couldn't do anything. There are still hateful messages from fake profiles, but the harassment eventually somehow stopped. I don't know how. I mean, maybe he got bored, or maybe he just saw that there was no fruit from all of the energy that he was expending, and he just stopped. "9 years ago, I had met a person that to this day I still wish I never did. I was an isolated, bullied, and depressed 8th grader, with the added state of being a plus-sized kid in a sports-centric town. So basically, I was beaten and ridiculed on a daily basis. I couldn't make any friends with my new classmates. All of my old friends from elementary school got placed in different classes, and nobody was in the same after-school groups as me anymore, and we were also all in a scout group, but that disbanded before I got into middle school. I was so lonely that if someone talked to me without picking on me, honestly, it made me happy. So I had a Google Plus account, the only social media I could access at school, that I kept hidden from my parents, that I would use to check out my favorite fandoms, and hopefully use to make some new friends. One day, I was on Google Plus in the computer lab, and I had commented under a piece of fan art of a character that I liked. The person who made the post had replied to me not even a minute later. I remember getting very excited seeing that notification, my heart swelling. The two of us spent the next 10 minutes of my class just sort of talking to each other in the comment section. We ended up replying so much that we flooded a good portion of the comments with our talk. After I had to change classes, I logged back in on one of the Chromebooks that we had stored in the back of the class and saw that she had actually messaged me. Her name was Haley, At least, she told me that was her name. Years later, I'm really not so sure it was actually her name. But in the message that I got, Haley told me that she was 2 years older than me and that we had a lot of things in common. I spent the rest of the school day on my phone, not really caring about anything in my classes at all. We talked for the next week in our DMs until she suggested that we message each other in a private chat room. Later that day, we made a private chat on an online messaging site, and we had our first conversation in messages. Then Haley asked if we could also do a voice call. I told her that I wasn't sure about that, but she told me that it was only going to make holding a conversation better with me, and eventually, after she asked me multiple times, I gave in. After an hour of us talking, she then suggested that we video chat. I agreed, both to make sure that she was actually my age, but also to put a name to her face. Haley turned on her camera, and she did look in the same age range as I did. I don't know why, but that fact still haunts me more than anything else, really. The fact that she looked so close to my age, plus she easily smiled and spoke really friendly to me, made me feel that I had nothing to be afraid of, really. That led me to quickly believe, though, that I could trust her. We ended up talking for hours afterward, with me practically on cloud 9 the entire time. In the beginning of our little friendship, things were going alright too. We told each other about our schools, what we looked like, what we liked, and gushing over our favorite series that we liked too. We talked almost every day, and stayed up late talking nearly all night sometimes. We even exchanged a couple of silly pictures of ourselves and memes back and forth a lot. After we had been talking for about 6 months, Haley asked me if I would like to meet her friends. At first, I was kind of ecstatic, and the thought of having more friends made me so excited that I didn't think twice before saying yes. Haley invites me in, and I got to meet her other friends. I had a completely different feeling about these people, though, compared to what I felt with Haley. Something made me feel unsafe in that chat room, even though they all seemed nice and that Haley reassured me that I could trust them. It felt like my instincts were trying to warn me, but I wasn't sure about what, so in the end I sort of ignored it. Most of them, though, were much older than me. In a chat with her main friends, there were 6 other people. Most of them were at least 18 to 19, but there were 2 guys that I distinctly remember being in their 20s. I asked how they all met, and they told me that they all met either on social media sites or from real life, but really wouldn't answer any more of my questions. I was a bit naive, so all of the red flags that were popping up went completely over my head. But from constant loud talking to frequently overlapping each other, the calls that I was on with them were just pure chaos. The messages were even worse, though, because they would frequently drop cuss words and topics that really should not be brought up with someone who was still a minor. I tried building genuine connections with them, though, but they all acted dismissive to me and acted like I was just annoying whenever I tried to talk in a conversation. Needless to say, I didn't like them very much. Haley, on the other hand, was all about them. She would pull the exact same habits, jokes, dirty words, and all of that with the others. They could say something super problematic, but she would be laughing right along with them. I was shocked by this version of Haley because she never acted like this with me when it was just the 2 of us. We still talked a bunch, but slowly she was talking to her other friends more than she was with me. At first, I thought that it was fine, but the more she ignored my messages or didn't pick up my calls, the more I got bothered by this whole thing. When I called to confront Haley about blowing me off, she just went ballistic on me too, saying that I was being selfish and that I didn't want her to talk to her other friends because I was jealous. I explained that that wasn't true, but she just wouldn't listen, and then she hung up on me. Haley then ghosted me for almost a month, leaving me worried and upset over what had happened. When she started talking to me again, I was so emotionally distraught. I was crying on our first call and apologizing for what I said the last time we talked. She told me that it was fine. She just needed some time alone and that she would talk to me a bit more. And indeed she did, although not exactly what I thought she would do. Haley began to tell me that she had depression and that was the reason why she wouldn't talk to me for a month. I didn't judge her about it and just said that whatever she needed to talk about, that she could come to me. This led to her trauma dumping on me nearly every day, talking about her terrible home life and how bad her relationship was with her mum and how much she hated herself. I was there to offer an ear and some kind words whenever Haley called or messaged me about it, but this quickly became part of a routine. Almost daily, in the middle of us having any kind of conversation, she'd begin complaining about anything happening during her day. If not that, it would be about how ugly she thought she was, or how much her life sucked and wanted to end things. The last one freaked me out a lot though. I was worried about her because we lived in different states and I couldn't help her in person. Every time she would become self-deprecating, I would say otherwise, giving her compliments and words of affirmation for so long my throat ached and felt raw. And then, just as fast as she'd bring it up, she'd drop that conversation and we'd talk like we were before. Haley also began calling for long periods of time and messaging me late into the night. Phone calls would stretch for hours at a time and her texts would come in until like 3 or 4 in the morning even. The thing was is that it was mainly her talking now. Like every phone call, she'd take over the conversation. If I didn't message her back quickly enough, she'd spam multiple texts back to back faster than I can read them. I would try to end them myself, but every time I would try, Haley would chastise me for wanting to leave our conversation when not long ago I wanted to have her attention. She basically guilt-tripped me back into talking to her, and honestly it worked. Even if I had lost interest in our talks, or didn't want her to message me during class, I would still let her talk and reply. At least I still had her attention though, and she still wanted to talk to me. This all went on in a cycle for 2 years, and it left me feeling more anxious and exhausted than anything else ever did. It felt like we had nothing in common anymore, and she either ghosts me for a week or spends the entire weekend texting me non-stop. The topics of her self-worth have also gotten worse. They escalated to her messaging me goodbye or I can't live like this anymore, without responding to any of my following messages or calls. Alongside of that, she would send me pictures of her, marking herself, telling me about how it felt to do it. The sight of those messages would send me into panic attacks, and every time I would panic and message her afterward, I would be sent into tears. Not only that, but the group chat with her other friends got worse. Arguments broke out frequently, drama and gossip spread like an oil spill, and it led to people being blocked, unblocked, almost every few days in fact, and I hated talking to them. They began ganging up on me in messages, and Haley was often the first one to make rude jokes about me that they would all laugh at. I began getting sick of it, and would stop messaging and calling both Haley and her friends, despite her begging me to. One late night though, while the group was in an argument over text, I hit my breaking point. I was tired of all the drama and them treating me like this all the time, so I messaged the group chat that I'd had enough of them and privately messaged Haley that I needed a break. Then I left both chat rooms, blocked everyone that I talked to, deleted my messaging account, and deleted the site from my computer's history. Once it was all over, I honestly felt like I had been freed from some kind of prison, and all I could do was cry in relief and euphoria over the whole thing being over. But here's the creepy part. So, I later found out that all of the pictures that Haley had sent me, that they were all stock images and photoshopped. I also found out from a bit of digging through her background, a lot of things just didn't add up. For instance, I learned that she was actually a lot older than what she originally told me, at least 6 years older than me in fact. Meaning that when we first met when I was 14, she was at least about 20 years old. Many things from our interactions still haunt me, especially the pictures of her marks and her scathing, self-deprecating messages. In fact, for almost 3 months I would have nightmares about Haley getting back in contact with me and what she would say or do to me. I have better friends now, and I'm absolutely certain that I'll never have to hear from Haley again, but sometimes I still wonder, who that woman really was, and what was it about me that she was interested in. Hopefully I won't ever have to find out, but I was lied to a lot by that woman. And now that I'm older and I look back on the whole thing, that whole situation was not okay and extremely creepy. A few weeks ago, I was driving in the middle of nowhere heading to one of my friend's place. My wife was sleeping next to me, while my teenage daughters were watching a movie in the back. Next to them, my toddler was playing with his toys, and it must have been around 1 a.m. I was a bit nervous as the drive there seemed to last forever, and I was getting a bit tired too. The dirt road with no lights gave me chills as all I could see around were only fields. The road had many holes, and I was trying to avoid them as best as I could. I was very focused on that when I saw in front of the car a luggage bag. It was in the middle of the road on my side. On the other side was a car parked facing us. The car was completely in the dark, as there were no lights inside or outside of it. I didn't want to drive over the luggage, so my first instinct was to go out and move it. Man, was I lucky though that my wife was with me that day. She grabbed my hand and indicated to me that something just wasn't right. One person was in the field, looking at something on his phone, the reason for which my wife saw him in the first place. I turned the car around and I was ready to leave this road when 2 people jumped in front of us from the field. There was no space on the road, so I couldn't go without harming them. 2 people were in front of my car now. There was also the luggage bag, a car, and the person checking their phone in the field behind us. I didn't know what to do, so really I did the only thing that I thought of. I just turned around again, facing the luggage, and just drove over it. Fortunately, there was nothing inside of it to damage my car, so we got out of this situation unharmed. We eventually arrived at my friend's house, and everything was fine after that, and we had a great time there. But I still get chills when I think about this incident. I mean, the whole thing was pretty obviously a setup, and if I had gotten out of the car, what would they have done? I work with adults with disabilities, so do take this story with a grain of salt. But he would walk about seeing a girl with no mouth around the house. For example, when he couldn't find his hat, the girl with no mouth would take it. One of my responsibilities was checking on him when he went to bed each night too. I had assisted him with bed and left him with his mask in his lap and stepped out so that he could get it on and get comfortable. I had left his light on and his door cracked so I could just peek in, turn off the light, and had went down the hall a bit. I was about 10 feet away, just looking at a bulletin board when I started to hear him laugh. Curious, I came down to see what he was laughing at, and when I poked my head in, he said, "I caught you." "What?" I said. "I caught you. What did you catch me doing?" I was laughing a bit, lighthearted. I didn't want to worry him, but in my mind I'm just thinking all I was doing was reading about the company picnic or something like that. He said, though, that he saw a hand reach into the crack of the door and turn off the light, and he thought that it was me playing with him. Here's the thing, though. His light, was actually off, and he hadn't moved. His mask was in his lap, and he was still sitting underneath the covers in the same position, same spot. He hadn't moved, and the light was off now. I had to flip the switch to turn the light back on. Now, I personally only ever had one experience there. I was in the living room watching a movie. The work was done for the day, everybody's asleep, paperwork done, so I'm just killing some downtime, keeping myself awake, when I hear this crash come from around the corner. Around the corner is a dining room. In the dining room is the kitchen table, and on the other side of the room across from the entryway is a client's bedroom. My first thought was that he had gotten up and may have fallen, so I hurry over to check on him. I get to the entryway and I can see that his room door is still closed, but I can see this through a figure standing in the dining room by the table, a figure that turned to look at me. Its right side was to me, and then it turned its entire body to look at me, and I could see through it to the other side of the dining room to the client's closed bedroom door. I absolutely freaked at this, backed up a few feet, and then it was just gone. That is the only experience that I've ever had at that house. I've heard from the overnight staff there who replaced me that she has heard whistling though. Now, the rest of this I could excuse. I mean, he had cognitive impairment, my eyes were just playing tricks on me perhaps. She heard whistling from the outside and it sounded like it was from the dining room. But I can assure you that that light, it was off, and I purposefully left it on so that I could do my job a minute later. Yes, he was cognitively impaired, but he didn't see things. He had trouble with his memory, but again, he didn't see things. And that makes me wonder just how much of the other stuff that he was telling me was real. This story takes place in 2020, before the pandemic started. I had been working as a package delivery driver for about a year at this point. During this time, the area that I worked in included the downtown area of Fresno, California. Like many cities, our downtown area was not the best place to be day or night. Growing up near the area, I was no stranger to the rough environment that I was working in. After dealing with shootings, the homeless, drug addicts, and drug dealers, it was easy to say that it would take a lot to freak me out. I have had some other strange events happen to me in my life. Some things I can't even really explain, but none of that was enough to prepare me for what happened on this day. So I had made good time on my route that day, as I had begun to grow accustomed to the monotonous area. The thing with package delivery too is that after a few weeks, you realize that it's always the same place that receives packages. Today was a little different though. I had been given a package for a church on a busy street that I had never been to before. Even though I had never been to this church before, I knew exactly where it was. I was also aware that it was near the railroad tracks and a pretty large homeless camp. This is an important detail too, as it will explain some of my thought processes and actions at the church. I made my way there around 2 p.m, knowing that once I was done with this stop, I would have to shoot back across town to do my pickups, then head home for the day. So, as I arrived, I grabbed the package, locked up my truck, and made my way to the entrance of the church. Now, something to note here is that I am not a very religious person at all. Was pretty much force-fed religion my whole life, and going to churches is not something that I'm really that fond of. I usually feel uncomfortable at any church, so the feeling of not wanting to go inside was not uncommon to me, but I had a job to do. Standing in front of this church, I noticed that the huge double doors were wide open, which to me meant that someone should be nearby and I could get this over and done with. Normally, though, I would have found this a bit strange, as it is a rough area after all, but it is a church too. Maybe they left the doors open to allow people who needed help to come in. I don't know. In any case, I made my way inside and was greeted by a giant mirror from floor to ceiling and 2 more doors on each side of it. Looking around this small entrance area, I was expecting to run into someone fairly quickly. However, the place seemed, well, deserted. I decided the best thing to do at this point was to call out and let whoever was there know that I was inside the building. Typically, I did this to avoid startling someone, especially down here. And as I waited a minute or two with no response, I figured that maybe whoever was here just couldn't hear me from where they were. Spending more than a couple of minutes at any stop could cause a ripple effect for the rest of the day, so I decided that I would walk around looking for, well, anyone. I decided that I should start with the doors that were right in front of me, figuring that this was the main part of the church and a good place to start. As I attempted to open the doors on both sides of the giant mirror, I found them to be both locked. I looked through the small glass windows and just saw rows and rows of chairs and a main stage area. Deciding to head left toward a small entryway, I realized that the 2 doors in there were the bathrooms. I knocked on both doors, hoping to hear some response, but was met with silence. As I returned to the main area, straight ahead of me was a dark hallway that I could barely make out that made a left turn at the end of it. At this point, being the only way to go, I decided that maybe the office was that way and it was the only place left that I hadn't checked. I made my way down the hallway, still calling out, hoping for any sign of anyone in the building. But as I approached the left turn of the hallway, the darkness seemed to swallow any and all light that attempted to make its way down that hallway. It was now, too, that I began to feel a sense of danger and a small tingling feeling that you get when you can sense something just isn't right, but ultimately chalked it up to just the darkness being a little bit creepy. At this point, I decided that it may be best to pull out my phone and use it as a flashlight since I couldn't see one foot in front of the other. Drivers aren't allowed to carry any type of weapons, but at least I had my phone out. As I turned my flashlight on and held it out, I noticed multiple doors all closed. I should have realized that this wasn't a good idea, but the work ethic in me said keep going and we get to drop this off and get out of here. As I continued forward, still announcing my presence, I reached the end of the hallway and noticed a door on the right with just the smallest amount of light under the door and a sign on the door saying courtyard. Figuring that this is why no one had responded to me, I went through that door. Upon entering the courtyard, I was greeted by the brightness of the sun and a bunch of dried up flowers. As my eyes readjusted to the sunlight, I noticed that this courtyard was enclosed by a fence, so the only way in or out was the door that I came from, and another door that was staring right at me, straight across from me. To my disappointment, I was the only one standing out here. Figuring that since there is another building, surely whoever was here had to be in this other building. Not knowing what to expect in this other building, I approached the door and began to knock on it. Again, though, I was met with no response and decided to open the door. When I opened the door, the darkness that was waiting for me, ready to embrace me again like an old friend, was there again. Hesitating to enter, I called out a few more times to make my presence known, but silence again. Returning to the darkness, I immediately retrieved my cell phone, luckily with the flashlight still on. The hallway was a sort of T-shape, meaning straight ahead of me was a fire exit, with an indication of the faintest red light above the door and another hallway on the left. With my light, even more dim than it was in the other building, I made my way, still calling out. Reaching the left turn on the hallway, I could make out, door after door, that they were all closed from as far as I could see. Knowing that I was reaching my own limit of being in this place, I decided to call out one more time. Expecting more silence, I stood there in the silence, waiting and listening. As a few seconds passed, I had decided that I'd had enough of this place now, when a loud clatter could be heard somewhere in the building. Instantly, my body tensed up as I remained still holding my flashlight down the hallway, the fear that I had been ignoring now reaching an all-time high. Within a few more seconds, I heard something slam seemingly even closer to me than the clatter had been. I even thought in my head, yelling to leave now, but my body was frozen in fear. Another slam even closer than the last brought me back to reality, though. The fear had finally won, and whoever or whatever was in here was getting closer to me with every second that passed, and I wasn't going to stick around to find out what it was. Running at the door that I had come in from, the blinding sunlight had never felt so welcoming. I knew that I couldn't stop yet, though, because whatever made that noise in the other building was probably even closer now. I gave up trying to reason with myself that it was an employee and settled on some homeless or drug addict that had broken in and made their way back in there. Either way, I wasn't going to sit around and find out who this person was. I knew that I needed to make my way back to my truck, and I would just explain to my boss later that something weird was going on, and so I left. With my adrenaline still pumping, I ran to the other door and made my way inside the first building to make my way out. As the door behind me closed, I didn't bother to reach out for my phone, knowing the walk to the main entrance was only a short distance from where I was. As I began making my way down the hallway, my mind telling me to get out now, I was hit with what I can only describe as complete dread. I have experienced fear before, but this was something on a primordial level. Like, everything inside of me went off like alarms and my body had completely tensed up. a feeling as if something had grabbed my shoulders, my legs feeling weighted as if I was trying to walk through knee-high water in a swamp or something. I was met with an increasing amount of dread and sorrow that overwhelmed me to a point that I knew that I couldn't handle it much longer in this dark hallway. And then, all of a sudden, all I remember is I woke up in my truck, in a random neighborhood about half a mile away from the church, and I was covered in sweat and I was crying uncontrollably. I felt terrible, as if every ounce of happiness had been drained from me, replaced with just hopelessness and sorrow. I began checking for my phone, and as I pulled it out of my pocket, my flashlight was still on. Which means that whatever happened to me, it did happen, and it wasn't some bad dream, confirmed as well by the package sitting in my passenger seat. As I accessed my phone to turn off the light, I then noticed that it happened to be 3 p.m., which means that I had lost an hour of my life with no memory of leaving the church or driving my truck to the location that I was currently in. Not knowing what to do, I called my girlfriend, wife now, and tried to explain to her what had happened. Speaking with her, I could feel the sorrow and the hopelessness leaving me, and I was finally able to get a grasp of my emotions and stop crying. I reached out to my best friend as well via text, since we worked together, and tried to explain it to him as well, since he had had some encounters in his life as well, and I knew that he would understand, or at the very least, hear me out. I have never stepped foot in that place since that event. I have driven past it, been near it, but I never had another delivery there again. The package that I had for them was eventually delivered by another driver who said that there was somebody in the main entrance and didn't even have to go inside the building. I have since moved out of Fresno, and even before I did, I was moved to a manager position, so I wasn't really delivering anymore. But I still have flashbacks to that place from time to time. They've gotten way less frequent over the years, but it still freaks me out. Sometime later as well, I talked to a friend who is a paranormal investigator, trying to get some answers about the whole thing. She explained to me that it sounded as if something attached itself to me that day. That churches can hold a lot of energy, and given the location of the church, it's not surprising if it had its fair share of sorrow and pain from those seeking help. This story has always been hard for me to talk about, because even to this day I have a hard time believing that it actually happened to me. But when it does come back, I always find myself asking the same questions. Like, how did I get back to my truck? How did I drive about half a mile away, and what the heck happened in that hour of time that I can't remember? So, I'm into LARPing, and for those who don't know what that is, we basically spend the weekend in the woods dressed as medieval fantasy characters and interact with each other. I go to these events with my friend and my partner, and we meet some more friends when we're there usually. Now, there are all types of people at these events, but 99.9% are absolute angels. I had yet to meet the 0.1%, but man, do I wish that I hadn't. Before the event started, a guy named Greg swung by my tent while I was setting it up. My partner and a friend were setting up the secondary tent up a path and couldn't see me at this point. There were 5 other people to my right. I had never met the guy before, but as soon as he said hi, I had a bad feeling. He was around 5'10", obese, a neckbeard, basically what would fit the description of an incel. He approaches me and asks me if I'm here alone. I say no, that I'm here with some people, but don't mention my partner or friend directly. He asks if I'm a gamer, to which I say yes, and from then on, he starts rambling on Ark Survival, which is a game that I personally have like 3,000 plus hours on. He tells me blatantly wrong info though, misnames the dinos, tells me stuff that are impossible to do in the game, even with mods, etc. And every time that I correct him, I can see that he looks to be getting even more annoyed. I end the conversation saying that I have to go back to setting up the tent, and he leaves. Fast forward to around 10 to 11 p.m. The event has started, which means that any mention of the real world, such as cars, TV, pop culture, etc., is forbidden by a rule called decorum. We're playing a campfire game with my friends and my partner, and the guy comes by to sit with us. He sits next to me. I move over. He scoots closer, I move over, and he scoots again. Eventually, I get up and sit next to my friend, and as we play this game, he keeps referring to the real world and to the video game, so we tell him either to leave or to make an effort and speak properly, and he chooses to leave. Now, the next day I go up a trail for fake hunting or gathering resources. As I come back down towards the village, in the middle of the woods with no camps that I can hide in, he's there waiting for me on the trail. He then asks if I would like to go and get a coffee or something sometime, to which I answer, no thanks. As we go down the trail, I tell him that I have to collect plants for my potions, so if he could excuse me, I'll be going back to the village to leave my bow and collect my basket. I'm walking pretty fast. He follows me though, grabs my arm and tells me that I could come with you. You, me, alone in the woods looking for plants. That's like the perfect scenario. I freak out at that and walk very fast down the trail to the village. My neighbors see me and they look very concerned. They ask if I need help and I tell them, in an honesty way, which is a code to say take me seriously, this isn't part of the game, that this dude is being extra creepy and following me. They take their weapons, foam weapons, and tell him to get lost before they carve him a new one. I stay with them for a few minutes before chilling with my friends. Night eventually comes and we're having fun. Stuff is happening in terms of fighting and encounters. Then at around midnight, I decide to go to the bathroom. At that point, I haven't seen this guy since around 7 p.m. As I come back from the bathroom in complete darkness, this guy jumps from a bush and pins me against a tree all of a sudden. He tells me that he's not proud of me, that I've been leading him on, that he doesn't understand why I would hold another guy's hand and hug 3 other guys but not him. I tell him that I hold my fiance's hand and I do hug my friends, but he's neither. I also tell him to stop this, in all honesty, to which he answers, but what if, in all honesty, I just want a little kiss, huh? Just a little kiss and then you can go. I yell no and try to hit him to get away. My friends, who were right on the other side of the bridge separating us, heard me scream. They took their weapons, called upon my neighbors, and around 10 people came careening down the bridge to help. The guy let me go and turned to my rescuers, saying that he was just interrogating me for information concerning the demons, our foes. My friends, who have seen this guy being a jerk before, tell him not to move, that they're going to get the owner of the LARP to deal with him. He tried to dissuade them, but my neighbors tell him to sit down or he'll be visiting Death's altar before he can move. I'm taken away by my fiancé, who is very worried and concerned about what had happened. The owner comes and I explain what happened, and he takes Greg outside the play to discuss. And from what I heard, he was kindly asked to not come back for any future events. This happened to me a few weeks ago, but it still sticks with me, and it always makes me double check all the locks now. So I was working an overnight security gig. I've been a guard for 15 years, and other than getting into brawls at nightclubs, happens more often than you think, I've had a pretty easy career, minus some contractor stuff that I did in Central America. The night started the same way that they always do as well. I had gotten off my first gig and went to relieve the normal night guard, whose name was D. I arrive and D looks a bit frazzled. He's an old martial arts guy that works the apartment job for the same reason that I do, half off the rent. I walk in and ask him what's up. He says that he encountered a guy by the gate that, quote, gave him the heebie-jeebies. He asked if I would go back to my apartment and grab my carry firearm. I hesitantly agreed because, having worked in this industry long enough, guns rarely lead to good outcomes, but D is pretty scared, so I agree in the end. I go back and grab not only the gun, but my dog, a 120-pound Anatolian Shepherd. I suit her up in her harness and grab her cutie muzzle on the off chance that something does go down. I'd rather have the dog ready to go. I arrive and Dee is elated to get the heck out of Dodge, gives the dog her standard good girl chicken strip. This is a nightly ritual, regardless if it's okay or not, and takes off back to his apartment. I attach the dog's lead to my waist and we go on patrol. Now, I live in Texas and our apartments are sealed by gates that you have to have the code for, basically. I go and check the first gate and immediately come into contact with the person that Dee was so worried about. It's 93 degrees out, but this dude is wearing a trench coat with a hood, and before we even get near him, the dog starts going absolutely ballistic, hackles up in between my legs, snarling like some sort of feral monstrosity. I give her the command to chill and she does, but what bothers me is the dude doesn't even flinch. I mean, most people see a dog that big barking and snarling and insist upon being no part of whatever it is the dog is protecting, in this case me. At this point, I step forward and initiate contact. "Hey buddy, how we doing? You alright?" The man turns to face me, and at this point, I see he's horribly disfigured. One eye missing but sealed up from surgery, the other eye a brilliant blue, and horrible scarring on the side of his face missing the eye. "Yes, I'm fine," he responds rather quietly, sort of in the way a child who's trying to fix something on their own might respond. "So, do you live here? Haven't seen you around. My name's H. You new in town, or has anybody ever told you that you have incredible eyes?" This simple statement made my blood run ice cold. At this point, I tap the QD on the muzzle and it swings out of the way. I'd like to think my mother used to tell me that, but I can't say it's something that I hear often. "Hey, listen man, you gotta get moving, okay? If you don't live here, I can't have you standing out here like this." At this point, he sort of goes rigid and reaches in his pocket. I don't give him a chance to do much more as I draw my weapon at this point. "Hey man, look, you gotta leave and I'm not telling you again. I don't know where the heck you're from, but I know it ain't from around here, so last chance, get out of here." He sort of slowly removes his hand from his pocket, and he's holding this little 35mm disposable. He lifts it, snaps a photo, and then says, "Have a good evening, your eyes are beautiful." And then off he goes. About 5 minutes later, I'm still shaking when the cops arrive. Turns out that one of the apartments close to the gate heard the dog going nuts, and they heard me raise my voice to our oddball friend, and they called. They tell me that they'll up the patrols and that they hadn't got any other calls about the dude, but that they would keep an eye out for him. Something reminded me of this incident that happened a few years ago at a friend's apartment, and I thought that I would share it. So back before COVID, around 2019 or so, I went to a party that my friend, 19 and female, was throwing at her place. No occasion or anything, we were just looking for a reason to get drunk, really. Anyways, I showed up and it was a small group, maybe 5 other people, mostly guys. We're all having a good time. A few hours go by and, as we're chatting in the living room, I hear a knock on the balcony fence. For context, they were on the ground floor level and their apartment was on the far corner of the property downtown in our city. We ignore it and continue on. Another knock follows soon after, and when we go to the balcony, we can't see anyone over the fence. We're all a bit confused and we've turned the music down by this point, and another knock comes. Only this time, on one of the windows and then again on the windows beside that one. It's getting closer to the front door until finally this person is knocking on the front door. When the peephole is checked, however, you can't actually see them, which means that they're either ducking down or hiding. So all of the guys tell us to get behind them and they're going to confront whoever is doing this. They grabbed whatever kitchen knives they could. I think someone had a broomstick too, which was a bit comical, but they busted out the front door. Me and the other girls followed behind, and to our horror, we see a single, very tall, skinny man crouched underneath the staircase with his right hand stuffed into his jacket pocket. His eyes looked yellow and bloodshot, and he immediately started to take off. The guys caught up and started questioning him, and he makes up some story about looking to get a haircut. They tell him to get out of here, and eventually he does. In all of that commotion, too, I noticed that he had left behind an envelope that was covered in glitter. It was empty but sealed and covered in blue and purple glitter, and my friend's car had the same blue and purple glitter sitting on the hood. We think that he must have assumed that she lived there alone and was going to bait her to open the door so that he could force his way inside. She lived at the apartment with her boyfriend, actually, but he didn't have a job, so he never left. To any onlookers, you'd only see her leave every day. And thank goodness she moved apartments not soon after that, and nowadays she's doing much better. But yeah, I really don't know what would have happened had there not been all of us there that night. I really hope that I never see that dude again, because the way that he was sitting there crouched up like that, it still haunts me. It wasn't in a passive sitting position or anything. Honestly, it was like he was ready to spring into action. So I was just 4 years old, and my parents had just moved my family into our first house. They decided to have a big family sleepover in the living room with my cousins, aunts, and uncles, and I remember that night that we watched Harry and the Hendersons, which was quite scary for me as a 4-year-old. And after the movie, we all went to bed. I remember this night really clearly too. It's possibly one of my earliest memories, in fact. But a cartoon girl woke me up. Her blonde hair and pink dress is still vivid in my mind to this day. She was holding a paint bucket and a ridiculously large paintbrush. She asked me to come outside with her because she wanted to paint some things. So I followed her out the front door. No one in my family woke up or noticed, by the way. The girl led me out to my father's truck parked on the side of the house. For context, I was a very small child and my dad's truck was tall and lifted. But there's no possible way that I could get in on my own, or even reach the door handle to open it. I always needed to be picked up to get into it, and I also rarely ever rode in it. So technically, I wouldn't have been familiar with how to get in it myself. And well, anyway, she opened the truck door and then set her paint bucket on the ground for me to stand on to get into the truck. Also, yes, my dad didn't have his truck locked, but we kind of lived in a neighborhood out in the middle of a bunch of farmland. My dad seems to think that nothing can happen out there, so he doesn't care to lock his truck or pretty much anything. Anyway, I don't know exactly what happened after I got on the truck, but I remember being locked in there and watching the cartoon girl walk away. Once I was alone, I was absolutely petrified. I felt like I was being watched, and I remember being horrified about that Bigfoot Harry from the movie coming out to get me. So I did what any 4-year-old would do, and I freaked the heck out. Luckily, my dad was working in the garage that night after everyone had gone to bed, and I guess I was screaming and crying loud enough that he had heard me from inside the garage. He ran inside the house and saw the front door wide open, still everyone asleep. So he then ran outside because, well, it sounds like I was being kidnapped, but he found me inside of the truck. It's still a huge mystery in my family to this day on how exactly I was able to get into that truck. My dad checked everywhere too, and there was just nothing that I would have been able to climb on to get inside, let alone even open the door. And it's been unexplained all these years. Ever since then, I have had countless paranormal encounters, and they seem to follow me around. But hey, it's kind of a cool story to tell when I want to spook anyone, so I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoy sleeping outside, and I have a tent in the back corner of my yard up against the woods. Usually around midnight, I go to bed and I step outside and my motion light brightens up the yard as I walk about 40 yards to my tent. I'll be on Reddit or listening to an audiobook, YouTube, Netflix, whatever. And the first night that I was out there after setting up my new tent, I was relaxing when I heard a scratching near the door of my tent. Haha, very funny, good one. Now let me sleep, I said. Then off a bit in the distance, I hear both my teenage sons laughing. The next night, I hear coyotes very close. They frequent the high-tension lines just up the hill, and I hear them often, but This time it sounded like it was happening in my backyard, so I sat up, shut off my audiobook, and hit the record on my phone. It was pretty awesome and gave me chills just because it sounded so close. I could hear each individual coyote. It sounded like they were sort of attacking one of the pack, but anyway, the next night I hear them again, but much further away, and an owl who hauntingly hoots most nights. Later that night I hear scratching again, and tell them to go away as it must have been about 2 o'clock in the morning, perhaps even later. I fall asleep eventually, and same again the next night, but by now I know it wasn't my kids. I told them to stop the first time, and me having terminal cancer now, they do what I tell them. Some nights going to my tent as well, I see rabbits in my yard eating grass. Nocturnal rabbits? I don't know, but we have raccoons, opossums, squirrels, flying squirrels, fisher cats, and many others. I figured that something was brushing against my tent every night while grazing or whatever, but one night it was so loud and sounded so deliberate that I sat up and turned on my electric lantern and looked towards the noise, and see my shoes bouncing up and down on the tent floor. I thought to myself, oh my goodness, it's mice this whole time, or a snake, something that was comfortable beneath my tent. But last night was different. You see, I hear scratching again, this time on the opposite side where there is no door, where I'm up against the woods. It was definitely not an animal too, as it was up much higher and repeated a pattern-like scratching, like a record so to speak. I say out loud, leave me alone, as I slap the side of the tent with the back of my hand. I could either hear or feel footsteps on the wet grass because it moved away and brushed up against my head and arm and stopped there. I had this pressure against me and I didn't move because I was terrified. After about 15 seconds, I felt it slowly move away and stop probably a foot or two away from my tent. It was weird to hear myself say loudly, "The power of Christ compels you." I couldn't think of something better to say. It just came out and, well, it seemed to work. I wanted to go in the house, but I was too frightened to open my tent and break for the porch. So I turned my audiobook back on, but turned the volume all the way up, and somehow, eventually I fell asleep. Tonight, though, I'm sleeping in my bed, and tomorrow I will go through the video on a bird feed camera that might have caught something. Being a skeptic, I will assuredly make some more excuses on what it could have been, but I was so scared last night that now I think that perhaps one day, who knows, I may become a believer. I was just listening to other stories here, and I got a flashback to something abundantly strange that happened to me as a kid. I figured that I should share it here, otherwise, well, I'll probably forget it for like another 20 years again. So my parents took me and my brother camping. I guess the place is still there, Nelson's family campground along Halesbrook in East Hampton. My brother and I used to slip quarters in the arcade machines that they had in this log cabin-y sort of main office thing, and we loved it. The trip itself was, well, pretty uneventful really. Mum and Dad were nagging at each other and lightly fighting. Dad took us fishing at one point. We didn't catch anything and he was kind of being a bit of a jerk. My brother and I were in Scouts, so we were pretty familiar with the outdoors. We went fishing and camping all the time with our uncle, who took us on more backwoods kind of trips. So we thought that this would be a breeze for us. It's like 4 a.m. one of the nights that I've got to pee. I've pretty much seen it all, and the campground is safe, and all I've got to worry about is skunks and possums. I put on a jacket and crawl out of my tent and walk over to the bushes. I'm standing there, member in hand, and I see this animal head with glowing green eyes low in the bushes, about 20 feet out, maybe a foot or two from the ground. I assume it's a possum, so I start to pee. And then I remember thinking, wow, that possum actually really looks like an alien, but as if it was a giant bug. My eyes adjust and I expect a possum face to appear, but no, an alien, but sort of looked like a praying mantis. It kind of sinks in how strange it is. The eyes are glowing green like that and not yellow, like a bioluminescent sort of thing and not a reflection. I recall it reminded me of fireflies at the time, and then my eyes actually adjust, and I see that not only am I right, but I also see that it has long, spindly arms. It's laying there in a position like it was doing push-ups. Its otherworldly and strangely long arms are bent at the elbow, which when bent sit higher than its head. It sort of looked like a long letter M, I guess. I kind of digest all of this, as it were. I'm not dreaming, so I should probably panic, but I realize that if it's an alien, that they're only like 3 or 4 feet tall according to law, so I don't really care. I mean, I'll kick its butt, right? But then it stands up. Well, the head elevates, the arms straighten, and maybe it's just a human after all and some gangly creep. But the head keeps elevating. It would have had to have been 9 or 10 feet tall by the time that it was done standing up. I was just frozen there trying to tell myself how not real this was or the millions of things that it could be. Then I realize, no, what I'm seeing is what I'm getting. I'm looking at exactly what I think I'm looking at. I'm like 20 feet from this 10-foot tall mantis alien with glowing green eyes, and it's just me and him. Finally, I scream like my life depended on it, because it probably did, and then just everything kind of gets, well, hazy. I remember making it to the tent and hiding in my sleeping bag, and my brother reacting frantically. My parents are upset that I woke up the whole campground, and I tell them what happened. They walk over to where it was and see that it would have for sure been a few feet taller than adults, and I feel like I'm about to be sick. Meanwhile, I'm expecting a long, gangly arm to dart out of the brush and snag one of them. Thankfully, that never happened, but still, I was absolutely freaking out. I want to believe that it was a dream or a night terror, but my brother harassed me about it for a good 10 years before, well, unfortunately, he died. I guess the most unsettling part of it all was just how confident this thing was, like I was just inconsequential to it, and it was observing me with what I would describe as disdain. I was just this gross nothing to it, like it could eat me, but thank you, no thank you sort of thing. I don't know why I felt that way, but I distinctly remember that, and the whole event is not something that I think about that often, but like I said, my memory was jogged by another story, and so I thought that I would share this. A little while ago, I heard a chair move in the other room. I looked over and saw that it looked like the chair had been pulled out from under the table. I felt a bit weird about that, but I blamed it on the cat and went back to decorating my MySpace page. Yeah, I was like 13 at the time. About an hour later, I heard the chair move again though, and this time it was facing me. Again, I tried to blame it on the cat, but that's when I noticed that the cat was above me, on the printer, soundly asleep, and had obviously been there for quite some time. When I realized that, I had the craziest chill run up my spine, because we didn't have any other pets, and if something was in that chair, it was sitting there, and seemingly looking at me. I was so freaked out I ran into my sister's room and hid under her blankets. She didn't wake up but was really confused why I was in her bed in the morning. When I told her what had happened, she said that she had seen the ghost in the house too. Apparently, one night she woke up and saw a tall man in a cowboy hat standing at the end of her bed. In that moment, she thought that she was going to die and hid her face under the blanket, but nothing happened for so long, so she eventually looked and the man was gone. This was my mum's husband's house, and apparently he'd had multiple priests and mediums come through, and they all said the same thing, that there were 3 spirits in his house, and apparently one is a cowboy, the other is an old woman, and the third is an indigenous man. I don't know which one was messing with the chair that night, but I am super glad that I never saw the cowboy at the foot of my bed. I'm 16 now, and I've been dealing with something terrifying for as long as I can remember. It all started when I was 5, and honestly, I still don't fully understand what's going on. I know that some people won't believe me, but I need to share this, get it off my chest, and maybe someone out there has gone through the same thing and will know what to do. So, it all began when my mum, who was a single parent at the time, met my stepdad. He was super nice, and eventually we moved into his house. My stepdad had a daughter who was 8 years older than me, and I shared a room with her, but she wasn't around much because she was already dating and out with friends a lot. The house was old, like built in the early 1900s, and I remember feeling a bit creeped out almost immediately. At first, it was just nightmares. I was scared of the dark at the time, so I used to sleep in my stepsister's bed because it was closer to the hallway light. But every time that I slept in her bed, I had this awful nightmare where something chased me, trying to hurt me. I was only 5, so I didn't think much of it and just stopped sleeping in her bed. But then the nightmares started happening in my own bed too. It wasn't every night, but often enough to scare me. I couldn't really explain it to anyone because, honestly, who's going to believe a little kid saying that they're haunted? Over time, though, things got weirder. By the time that I was 7, we redecorated the room, and I started noticing, shadows moving at night and hearing random old-timey music. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see shadows standing in the corner or behind the door. One night I woke up, but instead of being in my room, it felt like I was in my grandparents' old living room. It was completely empty, and even though I knew that I was awake, I couldn't see my room at all until I bumped my head on the door. That was when I started to seriously freak out, but I didn't tell anyone because I thought that they would just brush it off. By the time that I was around 9, though, I became convinced that it was the spirit of the old woman who used to live in the house. The reason for this is that the only owner before us was a 96-year-old woman who died in a retirement home, and I thought that her spirit had stayed behind. I'd see her shadow standing in the corner of the room where my stepsister's bed used to be, or I'd feel something pulling at my feet while I slept. Sometimes I'd see her standing behind the door, just a silhouette through the glass. I never really saw her face or anything, but I was convinced that it was her. I got to the point where I got used to her presence. I wasn't exactly comfortable with it, but it became a part of my life, I guess. That is, until things got worse. Her presence started to feel, more aggressive, I would say. She'd move around more, and her shadow looked less human, taller, skinnier, and somehow more threatening. The nightmares, they became more intense, and I could feel her in other parts of the house, not just in my room anymore. I'd hear footsteps on the stairs, like someone was walking around late at night, and the whole house just felt very off. This went on until I was about 10, and that's when I told my aunt about what I was going through, and she convinced my mum to have a priest come and bless the house. And weirdly enough, after that, everything stopped. For 2 years, no nightmares, no shadows, no weird noises, nothing. It was a huge relief for me at the time as well. But then, when I was about 12, my dog died, and everything started up again. I'd see my dog lying on my parents' bed, even though he was gone. Sometimes I'd hear something eating from his food bowl, even though our other dog was nowhere near it. And once, our kitchen clock, which had been hanging on the wall for years, randomly fell off and rolled all the way to my dog's food bowl. This time, even my parents noticed the weird things happening, but eventually they just sort of pretended like it wasn't real. They'd say that I was imagining things, or that I was just overthinking it. Then, when I was 14, I invited a friend over for a sleepover one night. She believed me when I told her about the haunting because she said that she could see spirits. We decided to set up an experiment to see if we could catch anything on camera. We put cameras in the room, and the next morning we actually found something. There was a dark shadow lying between us in the bed, completely still like it was dead. The camera stopped recording at 3:30 in the morning, but what we saw freaked us both out. I showed the footage to my parents, hoping that they'd finally take me seriously, but they just made me delete it. I wanted to send it to someone who knew about this stuff, but they wouldn't let me. After that, things went quiet again for a couple of years, and genuinely I thought that maybe it was all over at this stage. But 6 months ago, everything started up again, and this time it's way worse. I've been dealing with depression for the past year, and somehow that seems to have triggered the activity again. The shadows are back, the noises, the feeling of being watched, everything. A few nights ago, I heard my brother's voice calling my name at 1:30 in the morning saying, "Come take a quick look," or something to that effect. But it didn't sound right. It was his voice, but it was like a recording maybe. Then it switched to my dad's voice saying the exact same thing. I didn't respond, and I'm glad that I didn't. I think that it feeds on fear, and I think it gets stronger with that or something. I'm going to see a medium tomorrow. Unfortunately, my best friend moved abroad, so I can't really ask her for help anymore. I don't know what this thing is or why it's attached to me, but I really, really need some answers. If you're going through something like this, please don't ignore it. Find someone who can help, whether it's a priest, a medium, or someone who understands. Don't let other people's disbelief stop you either. I'll keep you guys updated after I meet with the medium, but please, do wish me luck. This story dates back to spring of 2016. At the time, I was in my late 20s, I was young and fit with very long blonde hair. A total hippie chick that had quit her job to travel the US with my ex at the time, pre-pandemic before the van life or tiny home movement really took off. We left our home in the Midwest of January that year, after holiday celebrations saying goodbye to friends and family. By sometime in April or early May, we made it to southern Texas and decided to check out Padre Island National Seashore. For those of you unfamiliar with the location, it's a seashore that you can drive right onto with your vehicle. My now ex and I were in a 26-foot Class C 1976 Chevy motorhome. We drove into the island at nighttime, and waking up the next morning was the most insane and phenomenal experience. The ocean was a mere 15 feet away. I mean, the visual was absolutely breathtaking. I'll never forget it. We arrived on a Thursday or a Friday, and the beach was beyond packed. Another thing for people unfamiliar with Padre is that it was where many Texans, high schoolers and college kids mainly, flock for their spring break. And spring break was just the week prior to when we got there, or maybe still going on. Either way, what I mean is that it was busy, and we had an awesome weekend partying away. During this weekend, we noticed that workers for the park would often drive down the beach. They're pretty protective of their sea turtle population there and would slowly drive by in marked vehicles a few times a day. And by Monday morning, we woke up to find the entire island emptied out. When I tell you that we were literally the only ones both when you looked left or right, we were the only ones for what seemed like miles. It was a gorgeous morning too, so I walked the dog quickly and then came inside to sit at our pop-up dining room table to do some journaling. My ex was asleep on the very back couch. We were backed in with the windshield facing the ocean, so of course I took a seat looking towards the beautiful view. Maybe 15 minutes after I sat down to journal, a grey beat-up pickup truck drove by, kind of quickly, headed towards the direction of the park entrance. That was the first activity I'd seen on the island that morning, and I didn't think anything of it. However, maybe 5 or 10 minutes later, the same truck came driving back past our RV, this time much slower. The man driving the pickup was going so slow, in fact, that we made eye contact for several seconds as he went back by. He also seemed to drive closer to our vehicle in order to better see inside. Alarm bells should have been ringing at this point, but I kind of just shrugged it off. I was very much in my free spirit phase and was not easily off-put. And this is where it gets really creepy. So obviously, this guy needed to turn back around since he was driving away from the park entrance again. But I was honestly minding my own business. I kind of put him out of mind. But yes, several minutes later, the man came back. But this time, he pulled directly up to our RV with his truck, essentially nose to nose at a 45-degree angle, to appear as if he were giving us a jump. Not far-fetched for a 70s vehicle on the salty beach, but he was blocking us in. It was now that my heart dropped and I began to get a bit scared. I screamed my ex's name immediately and he jumped up from the couch. I know that he could hear the panic in my voice, but I'll never forget just how quickly he got up and how he had his arms spread across while he ducked down to see through the windshield. He was 6'5", very bearded, and I'm 1,000% sure that he was the only reason that the man in the grey beat-up truck sped off like he did. It took several minutes for my heart rate to return to normal. My ex and I just looked at each other, because that was the most unusual encounter on our trip yet. Surprisingly, we stayed another week after that, in the same spot as well. The idea never entered my head that the man could bring reinforcement and come back for me or us. I was very foolishly fearless and naive back then, I know. Anyway, it wasn't until later that day that another fact dawned on me. When my ex and I had arrived over the weekend, we only pulled out one camping chair. That one camping chair was in plain sight next to our RV outside. Prior to this spot, we had never done that. We always got both chairs out. But we ended up using driftwood to sit on when we had our bonfires there. And so that was the nail in the coffin for me. The scary man in the grey truck absolutely thought that I was a young girl all alone. And I still wonder to this day, almost 10 years later, what all he had in mind for me that morning. Also, out of curiosity, I googled Padre Island National Seashore Murder, and it looks like a murder of an RV couple occurred there back in 2019, which honestly gives me chills. I would like to start by saying that I know that this story sounds crazy. I know it sounds made up. I could write a book off of the things experienced in this house. I didn't believe in ghosts until, well, I went through this experience, and even now I struggle to find my sanity when retelling it. My family and I all question our sanity while going through it, but I can assure you that this story is 100% true, and honestly I wish that I was making it up. I am not the only person who experienced things too. In the following story, I'll give you the perspectives and experiences of myself, 13 to 16 years old when it all happened, my mother, who was a widow, my younger sister, 1 to 3 when it happened, her name is Polly, my now stepfather, Mark, my stepbrother, 13 to 16 years old when it happened, Nick, a religious family member, Tina, a woman who stayed with us for a few days, Katie, my sister's godmother, Jen, the ghost hunters, and our priest. Again, I know that this is going to sound pretty absurd, and so it's hard to know where to start, but I'll start before the haunting. So when I was about 12, my mum married a really great man named Ron. This was the classic tale of a blended family. I was my mum's only child, and my stepdad had 2 sons of his own, one slightly older and one slightly younger than I was. And shortly after getting married, they had my younger sister, Polly. Ron was super fun and the ideal stepdad. Imagine a kid trapped in an adult body. The only thing that I didn't like about Ron, well, his family and his church. His family was super dysfunctional and toxic. His kids were, like, real bad, and I hated being around them. I'll get to more of this later, but he didn't have custody and was trying to get it. His church was also very different from what I was used to. I grew up Catholic. I'm not sure what he was, but at his church, the service would take hours, and there would be people barefoot in the aisles, randomly shouting out, speaking in tongues throughout the whole production. Nothing wrong with that, I guess, but if you're a Catholic and have ever been to this kind of church, it's a very different experience. We didn't go to this church often, but after my sister was born, he wanted to go a lot more. Now, there was this one very old sweet lady at this church who would always come up and say hi to my mum and the new baby. We didn't know her well, and she would be the first odd experience that we would have. You see, one day my mum, Ron, baby Polly, stepbrothers and myself all went to this church. The older woman came up to us and, instead of her typical upbeat, happy demeanor, she seemed very concerned and pulled my mum aside from the group. She warned my mum that she could see and sense a very, very dark, evil, powerful energy attached to Ron's family. She said that she could see it already affecting him and his boys, and warned my mum that she needed to get my sister and myself away to keep us safe. This woman was very concerned, but obviously my mum just sort of brushed the whole situation off as just a crazy lady thing. His kids kept getting worse though. All sorts of things, like one tried to kill his grandfather, theft, vandalism, all sorts of stuff. So they weren't allowed to come around as often. Simultaneously, my stepdad began to get cranky, sluggish, and a bit weird. I even started feeling very uncomfortable around him and disconnected. This all came to a head shortly after my sister turned 1. Unfortunately, my stepdad, he ended his own life, and I was the one who found his body. We had no warning. In hindsight, I could see changes in his behavior, but none that could have made us think that this was coming. He left a note to my mum and sister, literally, deeply, sloppily scratched into the wood on the top of a desk in the same room. Very rushed and not at all in the right state of mind. My mum, she went into a months-long state of shock, not eating, not talking, barely able to make eye contact. We moved out of the house in with my grandparents temporarily, and this is where things started getting weird. My mum was the first to have these little experiences. She claims that she could just feel Ron's presence with her when she would rock Polly to sleep or hang out in Polly's nursery. She would think that she would accidentally hear Ron, sort of behind her, or catch a glimpse of him in the corner of her eye or something. But then she started smelling his cologne, clear as day, regularly. Eventually, my mum bought a house for us to move into. On the day of closing, she slept in the house on her own the first night. She claims to this day that she knew everything would be okay because she felt his presence there so strongly and could smell his cologne everywhere in the house. She spent the whole first night crying, but feeling reassured that she was going to give us a great life. And Ron's presence was apparently a great comfort to her. It really all started as these very minor, some could even say positive or comforting, experiences. That was until the first majorly weird experience. So months after moving in, my mum was heading home with Polly from daycare. Polly does not remember Ron and at the time did not know that he had died. One day, as my mum and Polly are heading home, Polly, maybe 2 years old now, says to my mum that she doesn't want to go home. My mum obviously asks why, and Polly responds, because that's where Daddy is, and Daddy is sad. My mum is silent. Polly continues, Daddy can't breathe, his throat hurts, Daddy is choking, and starts making choking noises in the back seat. My mum absolutely loses it and speeds home. She immediately tells me, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know about all that. But it was hard not to believe her when hearing the panic and the fear in her voice. We didn't live there long until I started experiencing things as well. The house is a historic home and had cold spots, I guess you could say. Not, oh, the windows are cold in this room, so it's cooler type of spots, but I mean significant drop-offs in temperature by 15 to 20 degrees in those areas at least. The cold spots? Well, number one, my sister's playroom on the first floor of the living room. The second, my bedroom closet only, upstairs. And the third, my sister's bedroom, upstairs. Now, my first experiences were also minor. Like, I'd open my closet to get changed in the morning and get hit with like a burst of cold air daily. My mum and I would be hanging in the living room and toys in my sister's playroom would regularly go off on their own. Most often it was this riding horse toy that you had to sit on and it would sing this song, like I'm a happy horse or something. Toys going off and the occasional bump in the night eventually turned into the faint sounds of footsteps though, in the upstairs hallway. We chalked all these things up to just having an old house and it being normal to hear some creaks and bumps occasionally. We would also hear my sister talking to someone in the middle of the night in her room. She had this framed picture collage in her room from her dad Ron's funeral service. It was a bunch of pictures of the family, and we would hear her talking to someone saying who all the people were, like, this is my sissy, that's my daddy, this is mummy, etc. We set up voice recorders and caught it happening, and when we asked who she was talking to, she always said putt-putt. Our dog would also randomly start barking and growling at nothing in the house. Typically, it was in the living room towards the stairs. But things really got so much worse, though. My mum, she started dating Mark. Mark was my best friend's dad, and he lived down the street and worked midnights. Mark would come over to the house every now and then, and we always noticed that activity would ramp up a bit while he was there and shortly after he left. But we didn't think too much of it, still just minor things after all. I did local theatre in high school, and there was a girl in my cast, Katie, who came into rehearsal one day covered in bruises. Katie was a little bit older, but we found out that Katie's husband had been hitting her and she really needed someplace to stay until things would calm down. My mum is a DV survivor herself, so this tugged at her heartstrings, and she told Katie that she didn't have a choice. She was coming to stay with us temporarily. My mum was worried Katie's abusive husband would show up at the house, so she asked Mark to start staying over. Keep in mind, though, that Mark worked midnights, so during the day it was only him and Katie. But after Mark moved in, that was when things really took off. Katie stayed for a few days and then she suddenly left. It was a very hasty leave, and we wouldn't find out until later that she left because she was terrified of being alone in our house. She said that she would hear things, see figures out of the corner of her eye, and felt a very heavy or negative energy in the house. She also said that she felt like she wasn't alone and was being watched. She asked if our house was haunted, and we just sort of laughed at the idea. But then Mark started having experiences, a lot of them too. Mark is a very vivid dreamer, and according to him, he started having some of the worst, messed up, violent, even sadistic nightmares that he had ever had in his life in our house. Some of them are so sad that to this day, he won't even tell us what happened in the dreams. Eventually, he shared with us one particular dream and said that Ron came to him and was really upset. He had met Ron previously, maybe once at like a school function, but in this dream, Ron was yelling at him, telling him that it was extremely important that he find Tonya. Mark asked who the heck Tonya was, and my mum and I's mind were blown. Tonya was one of Ron's sisters. They were not close, and Mark never met her or knew about her, yet he kept saying that it was really important that we contacted Tonya. The next dream Mark tells us about had us questioning all the happenings around the house even more, because apparently Ron became a regular in Mark's dreams, getting increasingly more angry and violent with each dream appearance. In the last dream, Ron was losing his mind at Mark about some sort of RC car and how he needed it, and Mark had to find it. My mum and I had no idea what he was talking about, so we contacted Ron's old best friend. The old best friend knew exactly what we were talking about, because apparently Ron had a little RC electric car that he'd always take apart and put back together to make it faster. Eventually it just went into a box, I guess, in the basement, and my mum and I never knew about it. The car was actually before our time in his life. The best friend asked how we knew about it though, and was pretty shocked to find out that it was via my mum's new boyfriend's dream. The incidents only increased in frequency and severity too. Bangs, loud footsteps, sounds of running, feeling of not being alone, cold spots even colder, etc. Mark moved in full time though, and Polly's behavior took a turn for the worst at this point. Polly quickly lost the tiny amount of emotional regulation toddlers have. She threw tantrums constantly, would hit, scream, throw, and bite over the tiniest things. Her lying went through the roof, and we figured that these were things being learned at daycare or something. She completely stopped sleeping in her own bedroom because she hated that room. In fact, just walking into the room with her would lead to a complete meltdown. She would occasionally sleep in my bed with me, but I told my mum that I couldn't do it any longer because every time she slept in my room with me, I had a very weird and very violent dream. So she started sleeping with my mum instead. Other than the weird dreams, bad behavior, and car incident, the first truly odd experience with Polly would be with her and the missing apple. Polly loved fruit and ate apples regularly. We had a finished basement that was rarely used because it felt weird down there, but we had some of her larger toys down there stored away. One day we gave Polly an apple for a snack, and later that night remembered that we didn't get it from her to throw it away. My mum got super paranoid about bugs and it going bad, so she asks Polly where is the apple. Now, Polly had this tent thing that she played in the basement, and she would always tell us that Jesus lived in her tent in the basement. We just said, okay, and just rolled with it sort of thing. But when we asked where the apple was, she told us that she was hanging out with Jesus in her tent, and the bad kids came. No clue who the bad kids are, but she would also tell us that there were bad kids in the basement. Remember the bad kids for later. Polly, though, was adamant that either the bad kids took her apple, or that Jesus gave the bad kids her apple. We searched the house and the garbage can from top to bottom like 1,000+ times and, well, we just never found that apple. Polly is 13 now and still says that she remembers the bad kids in the basement and is still adamant that they took her apple. My mum practically interrogated her about it as a kid. But whenever she would be bad, she'd always blame the bad kids and say that they told her to do it, or that she didn't do it and it was all of them. Her behavior, though, kept getting worse, until she eventually would get so upset about something that she would start screaming and biting herself until she even drew blood. This is obviously not normal for a toddler. Keep in mind this new habit too, because this only gets crazier. A side experience my stepbrother, Nick or Mark's son, had soon after that also included the basement. He didn't live with us, but he had a key and he would come and go. He was not fully aware of any of the things happening in the house at this time, but he was coming over to hang out, and we were still out running errands. He said that he would just wait for us inside, and he swears on his life that when he walked inside, he clearly heard my mum's voice calling for something from the basement, and heard what he described as kids. He went down to look for them, and then called me to ask where we were. I obviously said that we were still out and asked why, and he was adamant that he thought that he had heard us. Well, while down there apparently, he felt the need to go to the toilet, because what story would it be without my brother going to the bathroom? But anyway, he didn't want to make the main bathroom smell, so he used the basement bathroom since he was already down there anyway. And he claims that right after getting off of the phone with me and being mid-business, he heard a child laugh right behind him, and it absolutely terrified him. According to him, he has never jumped off of a toilet so quickly. Now, we had been living in this house for maybe a year at this point, and the experiences were only getting more frequent and, well, pretty much undeniable. The footsteps, the toys, the cold spots, the sounds, the dreadful feeling. Making excuses for the things happening around us was getting to be pretty difficult at this stage. Polly is being bad, nobody is getting any sleep. We were frustrated, exhausted, and drained mentally, emotionally, and physically. And I think that's when whatever we were dealing with, it took advantage of us the most. Polly started having night terrors regularly, very different from a nightmare, and also started sleepwalking too. You would find her standing in the doorway of her room, standing right above the stairs, standing somewhere in your room, or you'd wake up to her standing at the side of your bed, which always terrified me. But mostly we were afraid of her getting hurt. At the same time, the sounds of heavy footsteps upstairs became regular. And I remember one night my mum had put Polly to sleep up in her bed, and Mark, my mum and I were still sitting in the living room just watching a movie. when clear as day, we heard someone absolutely booking it down the upstairs hallway. We give each other that look, and my mum says, heck no, she's going to check that. We needed to make sure Polly wasn't sleepwalking though, so somehow they convinced me, the teenager, to go upstairs and check on my sister. And there she is, fast asleep on my mum's bed, certainly not sprinting through the hall. Another memorable experience, though, was soon after my sister's 3rd birthday party. Mark, my mum, and myself are just hanging out in the living room with Polly upstairs asleep, and we hear someone come barreling through the hallway and down the staircase. Stairs were on the left far side of the living room against the wall. At this point, the sound of footsteps has become such a normal occurrence that it doesn't even fully weird us out anymore. But this night was different. Polly had some helium balloons from her party in the doorway of her playroom, and as we're all sitting there, after hearing someone or something come down the stairs, I kid you not, we start seeing one singular helium balloon very slowly float from her playroom, across the living room and up the stairs. I was absolutely astonished by this. None of us could believe what we had just seen. My mum went to get the balloon and found it halfway up the stairs on the landing. To this day, I still get goosebumps whenever I remember this moment. That was my first sighting, I guess you could say, but it certainly was not the last, and it wouldn't be long until we were seeing, well, figures. The first time I saw a figure was in the upstairs hallway. I never typically kept the lights off when moving around my house. You could turn the upstairs light on from the living room, and I hated the dark. My room was immediately at the top of the staircases, and my doorway was on the left-hand side. I was in a rush to grab something from my room, so I ran up the stairs with the light off, and that was when I saw him. Standing directly in front of me in the hallway was a man, probably 6'5", I would guess, but it was early evening but still dark, and I remember thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me at first. I stared at him for a few seconds and felt the fear welling up inside of me. When I snapped out of it, I went to flip a light on, and he was standing directly next to the hallway's light switch. I was not about to move any closer toward him, so I reached my arm inside of my bedroom and quickly flicked the light on. And by the time that I had done that, he was gone, of which I never saw him again. 2 other people have had definite sightings in that house, Mark and my mum, and they also had a weird sound experience together. Mark had 2 sightings, and the first one may be my favorite of all the sightings, in fact. Like I said before, I did local theater in high school, so sometimes I would get home pretty late at night. Mark, my mum, and Polly are all in the master bedroom in bed when Mark says to my mum, I didn't know that they were home already. She must have just gotten in." My mum looks at him confused and says, "No, they just left for theatre. She'll be home in like 30 minutes. Mark is adamant, though, that I was already home because he swears up and down that he just saw me in the hallway outside the bedroom door, almost like I leaned over and just peeked my head and part of my body inside of the room. Mark is so convinced, in fact, that he saw me that they call me, and I confirm that I'm not at home, but I am on my way home. When I get home, Mark thinks that we're messing with him and that I've been home the whole time. He has me in their doorway reenacting what he saw, and then he goes, no, it definitely wasn't you. You're not tall enough. Whoever or whatever I saw, it took up the whole doorway." Now, I'm not sure why Mark seemed to think that I was that tall, but it's consistent with my sighting of a very tall man or thing or something. Which leads to his next sighting, which was not nearly as exciting, I guess. We had one of those old school attics where you would pull down the string thing and the ladder falls from the ceiling. You know the one, right? And then you climb up and you lift that wicked heavy door at the top to get in. Well, we kept holiday decorations in the attic up there, and Mark says that when he opened the attic, he saw a tall dark figure bolt from his eyesight behind a stack of boxes. Upon seeing that, Mark just closed the attic door and he got the decorations down another time. Now, to my mum's sightings. She has always stuck to the same story as well, and it actually makes me believe her and also question what kind of mother that she was. Remember how I told you nobody was getting any sleep? Well, my mum was regularly waking up around the same time every night, and this turned into the tradition of her going downstairs for a glass of orange juice and going back up to bed and typically checking on us kids. We all sleep with our doors open, so she would just look in. Now, you'd walk up the stairs, and my bedroom was immediately on the top on the left side, like I said before, but the bathroom was across from my room on the right side, and Mum's room was at the end of the hallway on the left side. Polly's room was at the end of the hallway on the right side. And my mum, she claims up and down that she woke up in the middle of the night one night, flipped the hall light on, and headed towards the stairs for her regular orange juice. We had to put a baby gate up due to Polly's new sleepwalking habit, so she had to stop before the stairs to open it. And right when she reached the top of the stairs, something caught the corner of her eye, because she saw a tall black figure in my room, standing at the end of my bed, facing me. She stood there for a moment and looked at it, said to herself, "Nope, I'm half awake and delirious, it's not there." She goes downstairs and gets the orange juice, and upon walking back up, she says that she reaches the landing and, clear as day, sees the black figure run from my room through the hallway and into my sister's room. Sister was not in her room, by the way. She says that it freaked her out so much that she just immediately ran to her room and just got back into bed. Thanks a lot, Mum, right? Anyway, around this time, my sister got very sick too and was miserable to sleep with, tossing and turning, burning up, all that. My mum and Mark, they were in bed watching TV with the dog. Polly had been put into her room for the first time in a very long time to see if we could get her to sleep there. Mark and my mum claimed that as they were sitting there, they very clearly both heard, "Where is she?" spoken out loud. They looked at each other and immediately started trying to deny. Like, my mum asked Mark, "Did you hear that?" Mark says, "Hear what? The dog's stomach?" My mum says, "The dog's stomach? And what did the dog's stomach say, Mark?" Mark responds, "Where is she?" They then both freak out and run to my sister's room, grab her, and they put her back into bed with them. And here is where things, well, they took a bad turn. So, remember how nobody is sleeping or everyone is having issues with sleeping? Well, I had started to get really, really bad sleep paralysis. I had never gotten it before, but it became a regular occurrence. And one night in particular, I woke up, but I couldn't move. I was sleeping on my stomach, so half of my face or my right cheek was in the bed, and I remember knowing that I was dealing with sleep paralysis and needed to snap out of it. And I started to see the room around me or behind me glow red, and I could see shadows on the walls around me just out of sight. I heard two voices, neither of which I would describe as human. The first voice was on my left side and was very deep, guttural, almost growly, but repeating something over and over in a very rhythmic-like chant. It wasn't English, and it sounded like no language that I could recognize, other than maybe Latin, which we would hear at church sometimes. The other voice was higher, though, grainier, and sounded more agitated, I guess. It was like the higher voice was egging the lower voice on, and it also wasn't in English. It was then that I felt the most insane, heavy pressure on my back pushing me down into the bed. I remember thinking how I knew that I was in sleep paralysis, how it was likely to be a dream even though it seemed so real. The harder it pushed me, though, the more difficult it got to breathe while the rhythmic chanting only got louder. I remember starting to cry and genuinely thinking to myself that I was about to die. If you've never been in a situation where you genuinely thought that you would die, know that it's a feeling that it will never leave you. It sticks with you forever. Well, I tried to move, and I remember straining to scream or just make some sort of noise, anything really, but I was stuck and just completely helpless. But whatever this thing was, it was going to kill me, and I began begging God in my head to save me. I'm not even religious, but here I was praying, when all at once, it just stopped. I remember feeling my heart pounding in my chest, and unlike other bouts of sleep paralysis that I had gotten, immediately after the chanting and the pressure had stopped, I could move. I never had to, wake up out of it, which was just so weird to me. The next morning, as I was getting ready for school, I was terrified and, well, eventually I broke down in tears telling my mum about what had happened as we got ready for the day. As I was changing my clothes that morning, she walked by my room and stops me because I had scratches all over my back. Not deep ones and no bleeding, but red scratches all the way down my back. That same day, my mum gets a call from my little sister's godmother, Jen. Jen is a bit freaked out and says that she needed to call my mum to see if we were okay. My mum wants to know why she's asking, and Jen proceeds to tell her that the night before, she woke up in the middle of the night to a tall, dark figure standing at the end of her bed. She felt frozen and immediately felt a deep sense of dread. She started feeling overwhelming pressure on her chest, pushing her into the bed. All she could think about at the time was our family, and she yelled out for it to leave her alone, and it disappeared. She apparently needed to call us and see that we were okay and what was going on. Mind you, she had no idea about my own experiences that night, or about any of the other things that were happening in the house. This was too much of a coincidence for me to just dismiss, and we couldn't rationalize it or explain it away. If it was just my own experience, we maybe could have made some excuses, but how the heck did Jen know? And also, what did Jen also see? And so, it was at this point that we knew that things were getting serious and that we really needed some help. My mum had friends that considered themselves amateur ghost hunters, I guess you could say. And when they'd heard about the things going on in the house, they were down my mum's throat about coming in to investigate. They set up cameras and recorders and, well, just all sorts of gear. We all had to leave for a weekend while they looked through the house, but I was just a young teenager, so I was not allowed to see all the findings. But my mum and Mark were there to see them, and they showed the findings to my grandparents. My grandfather is a big military war vet, a sort of no-nonsense guy, and he said the recordings gave him chills, and he never liked coming to our house because it always felt odd there. The most active room, though, apparently was Polly's room. Polly's room was an icebox and was pretty active, I would say. Every cross from the house was placed in her room, and we even had a rosary blessed by the Pope in there. We were not super religious people, but going through an experience like this, well, I can confirm that it makes you do some crazy things, I guess you could say. In Polly's room, though, they had heard a woman's voice humming over the recording. They even caught something moving the recorder around, and clear as day heard a male voice say, "What is this?" while moving the recorder. They caught toys going off in the playroom, and caught the doorknob on my bedroom closet jiggling at one point. They also asked if they could come in and do some more research, but my mum said no to this because things ramped up a bit in the house after that, and also Polly's behavior really spiked. We knew then that we needed some other help, a different form of help, I guess. We first reached out to a woman in our family, Tina, who was very involved in her church. Tina came over for the first time and immediately stopped when she came through that door. She put her hand to her chest and said, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, but I just got the most overwhelming sense of my mum being here when I walked in." Her mother, she had passed away a few years prior and was a huge part of our overall family. It didn't dawn on us until that moment too that my cousins and I had a running joke growing up that we all had an imaginary friend named Mrs. Tut-Tut, who lived with her, and she was responsible for taking care of. Now, remember the putt-putt person that Polly was talking to in her room at night, and then we caught the older woman humming in the room? Well, anyway, Polly's behavior was still getting worse and it was starting to concern us. Tina asked when she came in if we would mind if she said a quick prayer over Polly. Polly was dead asleep on the couch, mind you. Tina walked over and sat on the couch next to her, put one hand over Polly and started saying a quick prayer. And I kid you not, Polly's eyes shot wide open. She immediately sat up on the couch and was thrashing around, kicking and crying and screaming that she wanted to go up to her room, take her to her room. As soon as Tina said amen and stopped praying, Polly crashed back down onto the couch and was out like a light again. It was as if she never even woke up, in fact. We all sort of just stood there, looking at each other with eyes full of fear. I mean, how could we rationalize that? 4 people just witnessed it too. We really feared for Polly at that stage. We went to our church and we spoke to our priest. He listened to our stories and gave us advice. He told us that based off of what we were saying, he felt the entity was evil and we should not try and make contact. He had to assure my mum that this was not wrong. We should avoid discussing it in the house at all costs too. No talk of the devil or watching scary movies. A crucifix blessed with holy water was to be placed in the most active rooms. They're still there to this day as well. And he said that he felt that it was probably demonic, as they can masquerade themselves as somebody else in the beginning and they feed off of grief and stress and all that. He said that he could not do any sort of exorcism though, as the church had to go through an approval process for that. But he gave us holy water and agreed to bless our home. He also taught us how to bless the home ourselves for future reference. He, Tina and my mum, they went to the house to bless it. And room by room they went through performing this blessing. When they finished, they all went outside to the driveway. The priest left and my mum lit a cigarette to smoke with Tina. And that is when they claimed that an all-black dog came slowly walking out from behind our garage toward them. They said that it was nasty looking, beat up, gross hair, just the ugliest dog that you would ever see in your life, and it came toward them with teeth bared, growling and snarling at them. My mum claims that she felt like it was evil and screamed at it to go away and leave them alone, and that it was not welcome there. It ran off, and after that she never saw the dog again. That night, my mum says that she had the most realistic dream of her life. She was wrestling with some sort of a dark figure and was fighting with all she had. She was screaming at it to leave her and her kids alone, and then she woke up from her sleep completely exhausted and covered in sweat as if she was actually fighting something. And, weirdly enough, that was, well, just about the end of it. Polly's behavior just significantly improved, like overnight. The noises and the sightings, they all stopped. Everything went back to normal for a really long time. The last thing that happened though was in 2017 when I was packing up for college to go back home for the summer. My room was all packed up and I had started to feel a bit weird being alone in my dorm room. I didn't have any roommates, but I just didn't feel, well, alone. I contacted my mum and they said that they had also started hearing some things in the house again. On my last day of college, I had to run up to my dorm room to change my clothes really quick, and when I entered the room, I felt a really sort of heavy and negative energy. I sat down in a chair in my room and immediately dazed out as if I was in the most intense daydream ever. The daydream was terrifying and was very violent, and it was regarding my little sister. I booked it out of that room immediately though, and called my mum and told her. They re-blessed the house and we haven't had any problems ever since then. Now, I know so many of you are going to probably say that this is all made up and it's fake, that maybe I've exaggerated things or something. If it was just my account of this experience, you know what, I might actually agree with you. But it's the fact that so many people around us experience things as well, that so many people were present for the same events, that it went on for so long. I have no doubt in my mind anymore that this is real. I honestly think that doubting it was giving it power, in fact. But since we have accepted what we went through and decided that we won't fear this thing or give it power over us, well, we've been fine ever since then. For those of you who will ask about the posts and the recordings and all that, my mum has never let me see them, so I just have no access. I've only got first-hand accounts, and also these were taken in like 2015 or 2016. I don't have the videos or the photos or anything, and they're from quite a long while ago now, so I don't even know where they are or if my mum knows where they are too. But ultimately, I hope that you all found our haunted house to be some sort of escape and entertainment, I guess. None of us believed in ghosts or demons or hauntings or whatever you want to call them, until we lived here. My mum claims that I too had weird experiences and sightings as a kid, and a few that I remember, but nothing ever like these. And we actually still live in that same house, so yeah, there it is. The story of our haunted house. A side note, or a fun fact I guess you could call it, that you might find interesting as well is that Mark's aunt and uncle owned the house that we lived in when he was a child. There were different owners between us, but after my mum and Mark started dating, we found out that Mark's aunt and uncle used to live there, and we learned a bunch of other history about the house, and the house still had some awesome things in it that Mark's uncle had originally built, like the bar in the basement, the built-in bookshelves, etc. Another weird side note too is that we redid my bedroom halfway through these experiences. When we pulled my bed out from the wall, there was this weird sort of devil cat stick figure drawing on the wall behind my bed. We never noticed it when we moved in somehow, but it was pretty big, like halfway up the wall I would say, and it took us 4 coats of paint to get it covered up. We would paint over it, and then the next day you could still see it a bit. That was always very weird. But the devil cat is just a blue wall now, and we confirm that Mark's family, they didn't paint the devil cat thing, so we have no idea how it got there. And that's it. That's the end. So, if anyone has any questions, then please do ask in the comments below because I'm willing to answer anything. Ultimately, I hope you guys all stay safe out there, and I really hope for your sake that you never have to experience anything like we did.